across the vast expanse of dimensional barriers. Universes exist in isolation, parallel worlds that should never touch, never interact, never collide. But in the spaces between realities, where quantum mechanics blur into subspace anomalies and Heisenberg uncertainty meets dimensional instability, sometimes the impossible occurs. Sometimes a thread from one universe doesn't just touch another, it tears through it like a blade through fabric. And when that thread carries a man encased in bleeding-edge nanotechnology, armed with fusion power and guided by one of the greatest minds Earth has ever produced, the collision reshapes everything it touches. Tony Stark didn't plan to invade another universe. He'd been testing a quantum tunnel prototype in his Malibu lab, something about bridging dimensional barriers for instantaneous travel that seemed theoretically sound on paper. The math checked out. The simulations ran clean. Even the first 3 test runs with inanimate objects returned successful results. But theoretical physics has a cruel sense of humor. And when Tony activated the full-scale test while wearing his Mark 85 armor, the tunnel didn't just open, it screamed. The lab exploded in cascading light. Alarms shrieked. The quantum field destabilized, and Tony felt reality itself lurch sideways. His HUD flooded with error messages as space-time folded around him like origami made of stars. Then everything went white. When his vision cleared, Tony was tumbling through the void. Not space as he knew it. This was something else. Subspace, his sensors insisted, though that term meant nothing to him. The armor's thrusters fired automatically, stabilizing his spin. His HUD flickered, recalibrating to wherever the hell this was. "Friday?" he called out. Silence. "Friday, status report." Nothing. The AI was gone. Not offline, gone. No connection, no response, no satellite uplink because there were no satellites to uplink to. Tony's heart rate spiked as the reality hit him. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone, in an armor that suddenly felt like a very expensive coffin. But Tony Stark didn't become Iron Man by panicking. He took a breath, manually accessed the suit's diagnostic systems, and started working. Arc reactor, operational at 98% efficiency. Structural integrity, nominal. Weapons systems, fully charged. Life support, 48 hours at current consumption. Thrusters, functional. The armor itself was fine. It was everything else that had gone sideways. His sensors swept the surrounding space and found something that made his blood run cold. A massive starship, approximately 642 meters in length, moving on an intercept course. The design was unlike anything in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s databases. Saucer section connected to an engineering hull, twin nacelles extending from the rear. Beautiful, elegant, and utterly alien. Tony's targeting systems locked on automatically, but he held fire. First rule of unknown contact: gather intelligence before making enemies. The ship slowed as it approached, matching his velocity with precision that suggested sensor systems far more sophisticated than Earth's. A light flashed from the ship's forward section, some kind of scanning beam that washed over his armor like ethereal fingers, probing every surface. Tony's jaw tightened. He didn't like being studied. Then his comm systems crackled to life. Not Friday, but an incoming transmission on multiple frequencies until it found one his armor could process. The voice that emerged was calm, authoritative, with a British accent that somehow made it even more unsettling. "Unknown vessel. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You have entered Federation space. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." Federation. Enterprise. The words meant nothing to Tony, but the tone meant everything. This wasn't a greeting, it was a challenge. The kind of challenge that came from people who had weapons, trained on you, and were deciding whether to use them. Tony activated his external speakers. "This is Tony Stark. I'm not a vessel, I'm a person. And I didn't enter anywhere by choice. I had a lab accident, and now I'm floating in the middle of nowhere talking to a starship that looks like it was designed by someone who really likes geometric shapes." A pause. Tony could almost hear the confusion through the comm line. "Mr. Stark," Picard's voice returned, measured and diplomatic. "Our sensors indicate you are encased in a technological construct of considerable sophistication. We also detect an energy signature unlike anything in our databases. For your own safety and ours, I'm asking you to power down your weapon systems and prepare to be brought aboard for further discussion." Tony laughed, sharp and bitter. "Yeah, that's not happening, Captain. No offense, but I just got yanked out of my own reality by a quantum experiment gone wrong. And the first thing I see is a warship pointing sensors at me. So here's the counteroffer. You explain what the hell is going on, where I am, and how I get home. Then maybe we can talk about the whole come aboard thing." The comm went silent. Tony could imagine the scene on that ship's bridge. Officers exchanging glances, weapons officers checking targeting solutions, the captain weighing his options. Tony had been in enough tense negotiations to know when someone was deciding whether to shoot first and ask questions later. His fingers hovered over the repulsor controls. The arc reactor hummed in his chest, ready to pour power into every weapon system he had. If this went bad, he'd make damn sure they remembered the day they met Iron Man. But before anyone could make a decision they'd regret, something else appeared on Tony's sensors. Another ship, smaller, faster, with a distinctive green hue to its energy signature. It wasn't approaching the Enterprise. It was approaching him. And it was decloaking right behind him. Tony spun, repulsors charging, and came face to face with a vessel that looked nothing like the Enterprise. This one was predatory, all sharp angles and aggressive design, painted in dark greens and grays. A warbird, his tactical subroutine suggested, though he had no idea where that designation came from. The Enterprise's comm crackled again, and this time Picard's voice carried an edge of urgency. "Mr. Stark, you need to move away from that vessel immediately. That is a Romulan warship, and if they're decloaking, it means..." But Tony was already moving, thrusters firing at maximum burn as disruptor fire lanced through the space he'd occupied half a second earlier. The Romulan ship wasn't interested in conversation. And just like that, Tony Stark's invasion of the Star Trek universe began with him caught in the crossfire between two superpowers he didn't understand. In a universe whose rules he didn't know, armed with nothing but his genius, his armor, and the absolute certainty that he was going to survive this. Because that's what Iron Man did. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The Romulan warbird fired again, emerald disruptor bolts tracking his movement with disturbing accuracy. Tony jinked left, then dove, his armor's thrusters screaming as he pushed them to maximum. The shots missed by meters, too close. These people, whoever they were, had serious firepower. Friday, evasive pattern delta. He caught himself. No Friday, no AI assistance. Just him, manual control and reflexes honed by years of combat against aliens, robots, and gods. He could do this. The Enterprise moved between him and the Romulan ship, and Tony watched in fascination as translucent energy shields materialized around the massive starship's hull. The Romulan disruptors splashed against those shields like water against stone, dispersing in cascades of emerald light. Picard's voice cut through the chaos. "Romulan vessel, you are in violation of the Neutral Zone Treaty. Stand down immediately, or we will respond with force. The Romulan response came not in words, but in weapons fire. A full spread that hammered the Enterprise's shields. Tony's sensors registered the impact. Terawatts of energy, enough to vaporize a city block, absorbed and deflected by those shields. His respect for both ships increased considerably. These people were playing with power levels that made most Earth weapons look like firecrackers. But that gave him an idea. Tony accelerated toward the Romulan warbird, armor systems calculating trajectories, weapons capacities, and structural weak points based on the limited sensor data he'd gathered in the last 30 seconds. If he'd learned anything from fighting Thanos' army, it was that sometimes the best defense was making yourself too much, trouble to ignore. "Mr. Stark, break off!" Picard's voice commanded. "You cannot engage that vessel. Their weapons will tear through your armor." "Yeah, I get that a lot," Tony muttered, targeting the warbird's port weapon array. His repulsors charged, arc reactor feeding them maximum power. "But here's the thing about me, Captain. I don't like being shot at." He fired. Twin repulsor beams lanced across space, concentrated energy that hit the Romulan ship's shields with explosive force. The shields held. Tony hadn't expected otherwise. But the impact was enough to make the warbird's weapons momentarily lose their lock on him. More importantly, it got their attention. The Romulan ship rotated, bringing more weapons to bear on this irritating insect that had dared to sting back. Tony grinned inside his helmet. "That's right. Focus on me." Which gave the Enterprise the opening it needed. Twin beams of amber energy, phasers, Tony's sensors labeled them, struck the Romulan warbird's aft shields. The impact was surgical, precise, overwhelming. The warbird's shields flickered, failed in that section, and the phaser beams carved a burning scar across the ship's hull. The Romulan vessel cloaked immediately, disappearing from Tony's sensors as if it had never been there. He spun in space, searching for any sign of the ship, but it was gone. Stealth technology beyond anything S.H.I.E.L.D. had ever developed. "Clever," Tony admitted. "Cloaking device. I want one." "Mr. Stark." Picard's voice was firm but no longer hostile. "You just engaged in combat with a Romulan warbird using what appears to be a personal combat suit. That was either remarkably brave or profoundly foolish." "I prefer strategically aggressive," Tony replied, checking his suit's status. "Reactor at 96%, minor thruster damage from the high-speed maneuvering, ammunition reserves down by 3%. All things considered, not bad for an interdimensional incident. But thanks for the assist, Captain. Those green bastards definitely weren't interested in talking." Another pause. Tony was learning that Picard liked his pauses. Probably the hallmark of a diplomat trying to figure out how to handle a situation that didn't fit any established protocols. "Mr. Stark," Picard finally said, "I think we need to have a very long conversation about who you are, where you came from, and what exactly just happened here. Will you come aboard the Enterprise voluntarily, or do I need to use our transporter to bring you in?" Tony considered his options. He was alone in an unknown universe with no way home, no support infrastructure, and approximately 46 hours of life support remaining. The ship in front of him had just demonstrated both overwhelming firepower and impressive restraint. The captain sounded reasonable, if a bit stiff. And most importantly, Tony needed information, lots of it, if he was going to survive long enough to find a way back to his own universe. Besides, he was curious. These people had starships, energy shields, cloaking devices, and weapons that made most Earth technology look primitive. The engineer in him wanted to see what made all of it tick. "All right, Captain Picard," Tony said. "I'll come aboard. But fair warning, I'm keeping my armor on, and if anyone tries anything I don't like, we're going to have problems. Clear?" Perfectly clear, Mr. Stark. Was that amusement in Picard's voice? Prepare for transport, and welcome to the 24th century. 24th century. The words hit Tony like a physical blow. He wasn't just in another universe, he was in Earth's future. A future that had somehow developed along completely different technological lines than anything he knew. A future with starships and cloaking devices and weapons that made his armor look almost quaint. A future that was about to meet Tony Stark. And something told him this universe wasn't ready for what that meant. Golden light enveloped his armor, and Tony felt the strangest sensation, like being disassembled and reassembled in the same instant. When the light faded, he was standing in a large room filled with technology he'd never seen before, surrounded by armed officers in strange uniforms, all pointing weapons at him. Tony raised his hands slowly, repulsors charging but not firing. "Okay," he said. "Now we talk." The transporter room was smaller than Tony expected for a ship the size of the Enterprise, but efficient. 3 circular pads elevated slightly from the deck, surrounded by walls lined with technology that hummed with barely contained power. The technology that had just disassembled him at the molecular level and reassembled him here, which was either the most incredible thing he'd ever experienced or the most terrifying. Possibly both. 6 security officers surrounded him, each holding a sleek weapon, phasers. His HUD identified them based on the energy signatures. The weapons were trained on him with professional precision, fingers resting alongside the triggers rather than on them. Disciplined, well-trained, but definitely ready to fire if he made a wrong move. Tony's targeting systems had already calculated firing solutions for all 6 officers, optimal repulsor angles, probability of successful incapacitation. Old habits. But he kept his hands raised. Repulsors charged, but not glowing. No need to start a fight he didn't fully understand yet. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Captain Jean-Luc Picard entered. The man matched his voice, late 50s or early 60s, bald, wearing a burgundy and black uniform with command insignia. He carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades earning respect rather than demanding it. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied Tony's armor with open curiosity tempered by caution. Behind Picard came 2 more officers. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a golden-skinned face and yellow eyes. Definitely not human, unless humans had changed drastically in the future. The other was a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a blue science uniform and carrying what looked like a medical scanner. "Mr. Stark," Picard said, his voice measured and diplomatic. "Welcome aboard the USS Enterprise. I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard. This is Lieutenant Commander Data, my second officer, and Dr. Beverly Crusher, Chief Medical Officer. I trust the transport was uneventful. You just turned me into energy and beamed me across space," Tony replied, his faceplate still closed. "I'm not sure uneventful covers it. That's teleportation technology. Do you have any idea what that means? The applications alone would revolutionize." He caught himself. "Focus. But we can geek out about your tech later. Right now, I need answers. Where am I? What year is it? And what the hell was that green ship that tried to kill me?" Picard gestured to his security team, and they lowered their weapons slightly. Still ready, but no longer overtly threatening. "Perhaps we could discuss this in a more comfortable setting. The observation lounge would be more appropriate for—" "Here's fine," Tony interrupted. "No offense, Captain, but I just got yanked out of my universe by a quantum accident, immediately got shot at by people I don't know, and now I'm standing in a room surrounded by weapons I've never seen before. So forgive me if I'm not in the mood for a tour. Answers first, then we can talk about comfort. The golden-skinned officer, Data, tilted his head with peculiar precision. Captain, the gentleman's caution is logical given his circumstances. His armor's energy signature remains elevated, indicating active weapon systems. I would estimate he is capable of significant destructive output within this confined space. You'd estimate correctly, Tony said, looking at Data with renewed interest. The way he spoke, the way he moved, too precise, too measured. What are you exactly? Enhanced human, android, AI in a body? I am an android, Data confirmed without hesitation. A positronic neural network housed in a synthetic body. I am curious about your own technological construct, Mr. Stark. Our sensors indicate you are wearing a form of powered armor with an energy source that appears to be a miniaturized fusion reactor. The engineering required for such compact power generation is quite remarkable. Tony felt a grin spread across his face inside his helmet. An android, a fully functional, conversational android with what appeared to be true artificial intelligence. Okay, that's actually pretty cool. I've worked with AIs before, Jarvis, Friday, but a full positronic brain? That's next-level engineering. He paused. Wait, you said fusion reactor. Your sensors can analyze my arc reactor through the armor? Our sensors are quite sophisticated, Picard interjected smoothly. Which brings us to our first concern, Mr. Stark. That reactor produces an energy signature we've never encountered before. Its efficiency exceeds anything we've seen in portable power generation. Combined with the weapon systems Data has detected, you are effectively carrying enough firepower to threaten this ship's internal security. Not enough to threaten the ship itself, though, Tony countered. I saw what your phasers did to that Romulan vessel. Your weapons operate on a completely different scale. So let's not pretend I'm the biggest threat in this room, Captain. You could blow me out an airlock if you wanted to. Which we have no intention of doing, Dr. Crusher said, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with Picard's diplomatic formality. But we would like to make sure you're not injured. That quantum event you described, traveling between universes, could have caused cellular damage or radiation exposure. If you'd consent to a medical scan. Hard pass on the medical scan, Tony said. No offense, Doc, but I'm not letting anyone I just met poke around my biology with technology I don't understand. The armor has its own medical systems, and they're reading me as healthy. That'll have to be good enough for now. Picard nodded, as if he'd expected that response. Very well. Then let me answer your questions, Mr. Stark. You are currently in Federation space, approximately 40 light-years from Earth. The year is 2370 by the Gregorian calendar you would recognize. And the vessel that attacked you was a Romulan warbird, a ship belonging to the Romulan Star Empire, a civilization with whom we have complicated relations. 350+ years in the future. Tony's mind raced through the implications. Humanity had not only survived, they'd reached the stars, built massive starships, and encountered multiple alien species. This was Earth's future, or at least a version of it. Light years from Earth, Tony repeated, meaning you have faster than light travel. Warp drive. Indeed, Data confirmed. We utilize a matter-antimatter reaction regulated by dilithium crystals to generate a subspace field that allows superluminal velocities without violating relativistic constraints. Our maximum sustainable velocity is warp factor 9.6, approximately. Data. Picard interrupted gently. Perhaps we should save the technical specifications for later. He turned back to Tony. Mr. Stark, I understand you're disoriented and cautious, but I assure you, we mean you no harm. The United Federation of Planets, which this ship represents, is dedicated to peaceful exploration and the betterment of all sentient species. We're not your enemies." Tony laughed, the sound metallic through his external speakers. "Captain, I've heard some version of 'We're the good guys. Trust us' from SHIELD, the World Security Council, and about half a dozen other organizations that turned out to have their own agendas. So you'll forgive me if I don't just take your word for it. I need to understand what I'm dealing with here. This Federation, what is it? Some kind of world government?" "An interstellar alliance," Picard explained. "Over 150 member worlds, united by common principles of cooperation, peaceful coexistence, and mutual defense. We've eliminated poverty, hunger, and war within Federation space. Our society operates on principles of self-improvement and exploration rather than material acquisition." Tony's targeting systems flickered as his attention sharpened. "You eliminated war. Really? Because in my experience, Captain, wherever you find people, you find conflict. It's human nature." "Perhaps in your time," Picard said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "But humanity evolved, Mr. Stark. We learned that our differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. We discovered that cooperation achieves more than conflict. The Federation isn't perfect. We face challenges and threats. But we've built something remarkable. A society where replicator technology provides material needs, where energy is abundant, where people pursue knowledge and achievement rather than wealth. Post-scarcity utopia." Tony's inner economist winced at the concept, while his engineer's mind raced with the possibilities. Replicators, matter synthesis at the molecular level, abundant energy, presumably from these matter-antimatter reactions, data mentioned. No poverty, no hunger. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. It also sounded naive. "That's beautiful, Captain," Tony said, and he meant it. "Really, you've built paradise. But there's a problem with paradise. It makes you soft. Case in point, that Romulan ship. They decloaked behind me, ready to fire. No warning, no negotiation. Your first instinct was diplomacy. Mine was combat assessment. So tell me, in your perfect Federation, how do you deal with people who don't share your values? Who see your peaceful cooperation as weakness to exploit?" Something flickered in Picard's eyes. Not anger, but a deep weariness. "We defend ourselves when necessary, Mr. Stark. Make no mistake. Starfleet is capable of considerable force when the situation demands it. But we don't lead with violence. We don't assume every stranger is an enemy. We believe in the possibility of peaceful resolution, even in difficult circumstances. Even when that stranger is wearing a weapon and just fought one of your enemies?" Tony challenged. "Even then," Picard confirmed. "You defended yourself against an aggressor. You also demonstrated restraint. Your attack on the Romulan vessel was calculated to distract rather than destroy. That suggests you're capable of tactical thinking beyond simple violence. It suggests you might be someone we can work with." Tony considered that. The captain was perceptive. Tony had deliberately held back against the Romulan ship, and not out of mercy, but because he didn't know the rules of engagement in this universe. Starting an interstellar incident seemed like a bad opening move. "All right," Tony said finally. "Here's the situation from my perspective. I'm 300 years out of time, potentially trapped in another universe, with no clear way home. My armor's functioning, but I have limited manufacturing capacity for repairs or ammunition. I have approximately 45 hours of life support, after which I'll need to either find a way to resupply or start making some very uncomfortable choices." He paused. "I need help, Captain. But I also need to understand what I'm getting into. So before we go any further, tell me about this Federation of yours. The real version, not the recruiting brochure. What do you stand for? What are your enemies? And what would helping me cost? Picard smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Tony had seen from him. Those are excellent questions, Mr. Stark, and they deserve thorough answers. He gestured toward the door. Would you at least consent to continuing this conversation in the observation lounge? I promise you'll be free to leave at any time, and your armor will remain fully functional. But I suspect this discussion will take some time, and we might as well be comfortable. Tony's sensors swept the room one more time, analyzing energy signatures, weapon positions, potential threats. Data stood perfectly still, watching him with curious yellow eyes. Dr. Crusher had holstered her medical scanner and looked more concerned than hostile. The security team maintained their positions, but with weapons lowered. And Picard was being remarkably patient with an armed intruder who just appeared in his universe and immediately gotten into a firefight. Maybe that said something about the man, or maybe it said something about how confident he was in his ship's ability to handle threats. Either way, Tony was going to find out. Fine, he said. Lead the way, Captain. But the faceplate stays down, and if anyone so much as looks at me wrong. Understood, Picard said. Mr. Data, please escort Mr. Stark to the observation lounge. Dr. Crusher, Lieutenant Worf, you're with me. Security team, maintain standard alert status, but return to your posts. Let's give our guest some space. As the security officers filed out, Tony noticed one he'd missed before. A massive figure with ridged forehead and dark, dangerous eyes who'd been standing by the door. Klingon, his HUD labeled the species based on comparative analysis with Federation databases his sensors were already hacking. Another alien species. Another unknown variable. This universe was getting more complicated by the second, and Tony Stark was starting to think that might be exactly what he needed. The observation lounge was impressive despite Tony's determination not to be impressed. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated one wall, offering an unobstructed view of space that made even Tony's Malibu cliffside mansion look mundane. Stars stretched in every direction, sharp and clear without atmospheric distortion. The Enterprise hung in stationary orbit around nothing in particular, holding position while they dealt with their unexpected guest. The room itself was simple but elegant. A long conference table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that looked more comfortable than they had any right to be on a military vessel. Indirect lighting created an atmosphere more suited to boardroom negotiations than security debriefings. Everything about the space suggested that whoever designed this ship believed conversations were as important as combat capabilities. Tony filed that observation away. It told him something about Federation priorities. Picard took his seat at the head of the table with the practiced ease of someone who'd conducted 1,000 such meetings. Data stood near the windows, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that somehow seemed more contemplative than military. Dr. Crusher sat to Picard's right, her medical scanner finally put away, but her concerned physician's gaze still studying Tony's armor, as if she could diagnose him through the metal. The Klingon, Worf, Picard had called him, took position by the door, imposing and watchful. Tony remained standing. Old habit from board meetings, where he'd learned that remaining mobile gave him tactical and psychological advantages. Plus, his armor's weight would probably crack their chairs. Before we begin, Picard said, I should explain something about Federation protocol, Mr. Stark. You've mentioned that you believe you've crossed into another universe rather than simply traveling through time. Our science officer, Lieutenant Commander Data, has analyzed the quantum signatures associated with your arrival. Data? The android turned from the window, his movements precise and measured. Captain. The energy patterns surrounding Mr. Stark's entry point indicate a subspace rupture consistent with dimensional displacement rather than temporal displacement. While Mr. Stark has indeed arrived in Earth's future relative to his point of origin, the quantum variance suggests he originated from a parallel timeline where human development followed significantly different technological trajectories. English translation? Tony asked. You are from an alternate universe, Data said simply. One that diverged from our timeline at some point in the past, resulting in different technological evolution. Your arc reactor technology, for instance, does not exist in our historical records despite being theoretically sound. Similarly, many of our fundamental technologies, transporter systems, warp drive, replicators, appear to be unknown in your universe. Tony processed that. Not just the future, a different future. A universe where humanity had gone down a completely different technological path. That explained why his sensors couldn't find any satellites, why Friday couldn't connect to anything, why the architecture of technology here felt simultaneously advanced and alien. So I'm not just displaced, Tony said. I'm probably stuck, because the odds of randomly opening another dimensional rift back to my exact universe are astronomically small, Data confirmed. However, not impossible. With proper understanding of the mechanisms that brought you here, it may be possible to reverse the process. I would be quite interested in examining your quantum tunnel technology, if you were willing to share the specifications. We'll see, Tony said noncommittally. He wasn't ready to hand over his research to strangers, no matter how helpful they seemed. But that's a problem for later. Right now, I need to understand where I've landed. Captain, you said you'd give me the real version of your Federation. I'm listening. Picard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in a gesture Tony recognized from countless negotiations, the posture of someone gathering their thoughts to explain something complex. The United Federation of Planets was founded in 2161, following a period of conflict and cooperation between Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and Teller. We've grown to encompass over 150 member worlds, representing dozens of species and cultures. Our fundamental principles are peaceful coexistence, mutual defense, scientific advancement, and respect for the sovereign rights of all sentient beings. Sounds good on paper, Tony observed. What's the catch? The catch, Picard said with a slight smile, is that maintaining those principles in a galaxy filled with diverse civilizations, some peaceful, some hostile, requires constant vigilance and occasionally difficult choices. We face threats, Mr. Stark. The Borg, a Mishaham cybernetic collective that assimilates entire civilizations. The Dominion, an empire from the Gamma Quadrant that views our principles as weakness. The Romulans, whom you've already met, maintain an uneasy Cold War with the Federation. And there are countless smaller conflicts, territorial disputes, and ideological clashes. So, not paradise after all, Tony said. Just people trying to maintain paradise while surrounded by people who want to tear it down. An apt summary, Picard acknowledged. We've eliminated internal conflict through post-scarcity economics and cultural evolution. But external threats remain. Starfleet serves as both our exploratory arm and our defensive force. We're not a military organization in the traditional sense. Our primary mission is exploration and scientific discovery. But we're capable of defending Federation interests when necessary. Tony's HUD was recording everything, cataloging names and factions for later analysis. Borg, cybernetic. Assimilation, Dominion, aggressive empire. Romulans, Cold War adversaries. A threat matrix was forming in his mind, the kind of tactical assessment he'd done countless times with S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers. And where does Starfleet stand on weapons development? Tony asked. Because from what I've seen, your phaser technology is impressive, but your personal armor is non-existent. Your security teams were pointing handheld weapons at me while I'm wearing a full combat suit. That's a significant tactical disadvantage. Worf shifted at his post by the door, and Tony caught the movement. Struck a nerve there. We prefer not to escalate conflicts through an arms race, Picard said carefully. Starfleet personnel receive extensive training in multiple forms of combat, both armed and unarmed. We also have access to personal shields, environmental suits, and other protective equipment when necessary. But we've found that appearing too militaristic can undermine diplomatic efforts. So you deliberately handicap yourselves to appear less threatening, Tony translated. Hope the other guy plays by the same rules. How's that working out with the Borg? Silence. Tony saw the look that passed between Picard and Crusher, something painful and personal. He'd hit another nerve, a bigger one. The Borg, Picard said quietly, his diplomat's mask slipping for just a moment, represent an existential threat unlike anything we've faced. They are implacable, relentless, and technologically adaptive. Every encounter with them has cost us dearly. He paused. I have personal experience with the Borg. They are not an enemy that can be reasoned with or understood through our usual frameworks. Tony's sensors picked up elevated heart rate and stress hormones in Picard's biosignature. Whatever had happened between this captain and the Borg, it was deeply traumatic. That was useful intelligence, both about the threat and about Picard's vulnerabilities. But it also triggered something in Tony. He knew that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror after New York, after seeing the Chitauri pour through the portal and realizing how utterly unprepared Earth had been. The look of someone who'd seen horrors and now carried the responsibility of preventing them from happening again. You fought them, Tony said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The single word carried volumes. And you lost people. Thousands. Tony nodded slowly. Then you understand. You build weapons not because you want to use them, but because you know what happens when you don't have them. When the enemy shows up with overwhelming force and you're standing there with nothing but good intentions and a prayer. That's one philosophy, Picard said. But it's not the only one. Yes, we must be prepared to defend ourselves. But if we allow fear to drive us toward endless militarization, we risk becoming the very thing we fight against. We risk losing the values that make us worth defending in the first place. Noble, Tony said. Seriously, that's a nice sentiment. But here's the problem with noble sentiments, Captain. They don't stop disruptor fire. They don't protect civilians when the bad guys show up. In my universe, we learned that lesson the hard way. Aliens invaded New York. Thousands died. And you know what I realized? We weren't ready. We had heroes. We had good intentions. But we didn't have the tools to protect people when it mattered. So you built weapons, Dr. Crusher said. Not accusatory, but trying to understand. I built armor, Tony corrected. I built AI systems to monitor threats. I built technology to close the gap between maybe we can defend ourselves and we're actually ready for what's coming. Because, in my experience, the threats don't care about your values. They care about winning. Data tilted his head with that peculiar android precision. A fascinating philosophical divergence. Your universe appears to have taken a more militaristic approach to existential threats, while ours has maintained faith in diplomatic and technological solutions through collective effort rather than individual armament. Both approaches have merit and drawbacks. Mr. Stark, Picard said, his voice measured but firm. I don't dismiss your concerns. And I won't pretend the Federation is perfect in its responses to threats. But consider this. In your universe, how much of your conflict stems from arms races? From the fear that drives nations or individuals to build ever more powerful weapons, which in turn drives others to do the same. We've learned that breaking that cycle requires someone to step back first. And if no one else steps back, Tony challenged, if you're the only one choosing peace while everyone else chooses violence, then we defend ourselves with the minimum force necessary, Picard said. We don't compromise our principles because doing so is expedient. We prove through our actions that there's another way. Tony wanted to argue. Part of him, the part that had seen Thanos coming, that had watched Peter Parker disintegrate in his arms, that had spent years preparing Earth for threats the Avengers couldn't punch away, wanted to tell this captain that his idealism would get people killed, that the universe was harsher and crueler than he wanted to admit. But another part of him, the part that was tired of building weapons and making hard calls and playing God with other people's lives, found something appealing in Picard's conviction. What if there was a universe where Tony Stark didn't have to be Iron Man, where humanity had actually figured out how to move past its worst impulses? Okay, Tony said finally. I hear you, Captain. We disagree on methods, but I can respect your position. So here's where we stand. I'm stuck in your universe until I can figure out how to get home. I need resources, manufacturing capacity, materials, access to technology I can study and potentially adapt. In exchange, I can offer my expertise. I'm a world-class engineer and inventor. I can help with your systems, maybe even improve them. But I need to know what I'm signing up for. You're not signing up for anything, Picard said firmly. You're our guest, Mr. Stark, not a recruit or a resource to be exploited. The Federation doesn't operate that way. We'll provide whatever assistance we can in helping you return to your universe. In the meantime, you're welcome to remain aboard the Enterprise, or we can arrange quarters on a starbase or planetary facility. We'll share our technical knowledge freely. That's our way. And if you choose to contribute your expertise, we'll be grateful. But there are no strings attached. Tony's cynicism flared. Everyone has strings, Captain. In my experience, no strings attached just means the strings are hidden better. Perhaps in your universe, Picard said. But you're in ours now. And one of the things you'll learn about the Federation, Mr. Stark, is that we mean what we say. We don't have ulterior motives because we don't need them. We're not competing for resources or power. We're simply trying to explore, to learn, and to help where we can. Before Tony could respond, the door chimed. Worf straightened, hand moving unconsciously toward his phaser. Tony's targeting systems activated automatically. Too many years of combat reflexes. Come, Picard called. The door slid open and another officer entered, young, dark-skinned, wearing the red command uniform. His eyes went wide when he saw Tony's armor, but he maintained his composure. Captain, sorry to interrupt, but we've received a priority message from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev wants a real-time briefing on the incident with the Romulan warbird and... He glanced at Tony. The unidentified contact. That would be me, Tony said. Tony Stark, dimensional refugee and apparently a priority concern for your admirals. I'm popular already. Picard stood. Thank you, Ensign. Inform the Admiral. I'll contact her within the hour. The ensign nodded and left. Picard turned back to Tony. Mr. Stark, I need to brief Starfleet Command on your arrival and the Romulan incident. I would prefer to have your permission to share what we've discussed, including your origins and situation. Will that get me in trouble? Tony asked. Because I'm getting the sense that randomly appearing in another universe and immediately shooting at Romulans might violate some of your rules. You defended yourself against an unprovoked attack, Picard said. And you're the victim of a dimensional accident, not a deliberate incursion. Starfleet will likely be very interested in studying your technology and circumstances, but you haven't committed any crime under Federation law. Yet, Tony muttered. All right, Captain. Tell your Admiral whatever you need to, but make something clear. I'm cooperating because it serves my interests to do so, not because I'm surrendering my autonomy. I go where I want, I keep my armor, and I make my own choices. Those are my terms. Those terms are acceptable, Picard said. In fact, they align with Federation principles. You're a sentient being with full rights and freedoms. No one aboard this ship would suggest otherwise. Tony studied Picard's face, searching for deception or hidden agendas. But the captain's expression remained open, honest, almost earnest in his conviction. Either he was a masterful liar, or he actually believed every word he was saying. Tony wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. All right then, Tony said. While you're briefing your Admiral, I'll be running diagnostics on my armor and trying to figure out how your transporter works without violating half a dozen laws of physics. Data, you said you wanted to discuss my quantum tunnel technology? I would be fascinated to learn more, Data confirmed. Then let's geek out about dimensional physics while the grown-ups handle the politics, Tony said. Fair warning, I'm going to ask about 1,000 questions about your positronic brain, your android construction, and probably everything else on this ship. I welcome your curiosity, Data said, and Tony could swear there was something like enthusiasm in the android's voice. As Picard and the others left the observation lounge, Tony found himself alone with Data and the vast expanse of space beyond the windows. Somewhere out there was his universe, his Earth, his timeline. Pepper, Happy, Peter, the Avengers, everyone he'd left behind when the quantum tunnel had malfunctioned. But right now, he was here, in a universe that played by different rules, with technology he couldn't wait to dissect, and a philosophy he couldn't quite accept. Tony Stark had invaded the Star Trek universe. Now he just had to figure out whether he was going to help them improve it, break it, or something in between. Tony spent the next 4 hours in engineering with Data, and it was the closest thing to happiness he'd felt since arriving in this universe. The Enterprise's engine room was a cathedral to advanced physics, a massive chamber dominated by a towering warp core that pulsed with matter. Antimatter reactions, generating energies that made even his arc reactor look modest by comparison. The dilithium crystal assembly channeled unfathomable power into controlled subspace fields, bending the very fabric of reality to enable faster-than-light travel without technically violating Einstein's speed limit. It was beautiful. It was elegant. And Tony wanted to take the entire thing apart to see how it worked. Fascinating, he muttered for the dozenth time, his armor's sensors recording every detail of the warp core's energy signatures. You're essentially creating a bubble of compressed space-time around the ship. The vessel doesn't move. Space moves around it. That's brilliant. Completely bypasses relativistic time dilation. Precisely, Data confirmed, standing beside him with what might have been pride if androids felt such things. The warp field generates a subspace displacement that allows the ship to achieve velocities of several thousand times the speed of light. Our current cruising speed of warp 6 corresponds to approximately 392 times light speed. Tony's mind reeled at the implications. And the energy requirements? The matter-antimatter reaction produces approximately 3,000 terawatts at current operating capacity. Dilithium crystals modulate the reaction through their unique crystalline structure, which exists partially in subspace. Without dilithium, controlled matter-antimatter annihilation would be impossible with our current technology. So your entire civilization's FTL capability depends on one exotic material, Tony observed. That's a critical failure point. What happens if the dilithium supply runs out? An astute observation, Data said. Dilithium recrystallization techniques have been developed to extend crystal lifespan. But you are correct that our dependence on this resource represents a vulnerability. Alternative warp field generation methods have been theorized, but not successfully implemented. Tony filed that away. Vulnerability meant opportunity, not to exploit, but to solve. If he was stuck here, contributing something valuable like alternative warp technology might buy him considerable goodwill and resources. What about your transporter? Tony asked, moving toward a nearby console. You literally disassembled me at the quantum level and reassembled me elsewhere. That's Star Trek's answer to teleportation, and it's insane. The computing power alone to track every particle, every quantum state. The Heisenberg compensators, Data interjected. They bypass quantum uncertainty limitations through subspace field manipulation. The transporter converts matter to energy, transmits that energy through a subspace carrier wave, and reconverts it at the destination coordinates. Your consciousness, memories, and quantum states remain intact throughout the process. How? Tony demanded. That should be impossible. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is fundamental. You can't simultaneously know position and momentum of particles with absolute precision. We manipulate the uncertainty itself, Data explained. The compensator creates a subspace field that temporarily allows precision measurements that would otherwise violate quantum mechanics. It is, admittedly, a technology we do not fully understand on a theoretical level. It was developed through practical experimentation rather than complete theoretical framework. Tony laughed, sharp and genuine. You're using technology you can't completely explain. That's actually refreshing. Every engineer deals with that eventually. It works, we just don't know exactly why is basically the unofficial motto of experimental physics. Indeed, Data agreed. Your arc reactor technology presents similar questions. Our scans indicate a sustained fusion reaction at a scale that should not be thermodynamically stable, yet it functions with remarkable efficiency. How did you overcome the plasma containment challenges? And there it was, the beginning of genuine scientific exchange. Tony found himself explaining palladium isotope matrices, electromagnetic field harmonics, and the breakthrough that had saved his life in that cave in Afghanistan. Data listened with perfect attention, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated not just comprehension, but genuine insight. They were comparing notes on miniaturized power generation when Chief Engineer Geordi LaForge returned to engineering. The man wore a distinctive visor over his eyes, a technological prosthetic that apparently allowed him to see electromagnetic spectrum ranges far beyond normal human vision. He approached cautiously, clearly uncomfortable with an armored stranger examining his engines. "Commander Data," Geordi said carefully. "The captain wants a status update on our new guest's armor, specifically whether it poses any threat to ship systems." "Mr. LaForge, may I introduce Tony Stark?" Data said. "Mr. Stark, this is Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge, our chief engineer." Tony extended a gauntleted hand. "Your warp core is a work of art. Seriously, whoever designed this thing understood power systems on a level most engineers never reach." Geordi's tension eased slightly as he shook Tony's hand. "Thanks. I've made some modifications over the years, but the basic design is Starfleet standard for Galaxy-class ships." He gestured to Tony's armor. "Your suit is pretty impressive too. That miniaturized power source, I've been looking at the sensor readings. Are you seriously running a fusion reactor in your chest? Arc reactor, Tony corrected. Based on my father's work with repulsor technology and some modifications I made when I was dying of palladium poisoning. It's complicated. I bet, Geordi said, warming to the technical discussion. The electromagnetic field containment alone should require systems 10 times that size. How are you managing the plasma temperatures? Before Tony could answer, the ship's intercom chimed. Bridge to engineering. Mr. Data, please report to the observation lounge. Captain Picard has concluded his briefing with Starfleet Command. Acknowledged, Data replied. He turned to Tony. It appears the captain has completed his discussion with Admiral Nechayev. He will likely wish to inform you of Starfleet's official position regarding your presence. Tony's good mood evaporated. Right. He wasn't here on a field trip. He was an interdimensional anomaly that some admiral was probably very concerned about. Let me guess. They want to study me, debrief me, and probably lock my armor in a lab somewhere for security analysis. Admiral Nechayev does have a reputation for pragmatism over diplomacy, Geordi admitted. But Captain Picard won't let anyone push you around. He takes Federation principles seriously, especially regarding individual rights. We'll see, Tony said. Data, lead the way. Geordi, we'll continue this conversation later. I've got some ideas about improving your warp field efficiency that you might find interesting. I'd like that, Geordi said, and he sounded genuine. The observation lounge felt different this time, more crowded. Picard sat at the head of the table, flanked by his senior officers, Data, Geordi, Worf, Dr. Crusher, and a woman Tony hadn't met before who wore a blue science uniform and studied him with unsettling intensity. A betazoid, his HUD labeled her based on comparative analysis, telepathic species. Counselor Deanna Troi, ship's psychologist. Great, a telepath. Tony made a mental note to keep his thoughts carefully controlled. Mr. Stark, Picard began, thank you for joining us. This is Counselor Deanna Troi, our ship's counselor and diplomatic officer. Counselor? Tony acknowledged, not extending his hand this time. Please tell me you're not reading my thoughts right now, because that would make this conversation very uncomfortable. Troi smiled with professional warmth. I sense emotions, not thoughts, and I only use my abilities when necessary for ship's business. Right now, I sense considerable caution from you, curiosity, and underlying anxiety about your situation. All perfectly reasonable given your circumstances. Good to know I'm emotionally transparent, Tony muttered. So, Captain, what's the verdict? Am I a guest, a prisoner, or a science experiment? A guest, Picard said firmly, with some caveats. Admiral Nechayev has reviewed my report on your arrival and the incident with the Romulan warbird. Starfleet Command is intrigued by your situation. They've authorized me to extend full guest privileges aboard the Enterprise and to provide whatever assistance we can in helping you understand our technology and potentially return to your own universe. That sounds too good to be true, Tony said. Where's the catch? Picard's expression tightened slightly. The Admiral has also requested that we conduct a full technological assessment of your armor and arc reactor technology. She believes your dimensional displacement may have strategic implications, and that understanding the mechanisms involved could be valuable to Federation security. Translation: she wants my tech specs, Tony said flatly. Wants to know what I can do, how I do it, and whether she can replicate it for Starfleet. The Admiral's concerns are not unreasonable, Picard said carefully. A visitor from another universe with unknown capabilities appearing in Federation space, particularly one who immediately engaged in combat with a Romulan warbird, raises legitimate security questions. I was defending myself, Tony snapped. That Romulan ship decloaked behind me with weapons. Hot. What was I supposed to do? Hope they were just saying hello? No one is questioning your actions, Picard assured him. In fact, Starfleet considers your response entirely appropriate, given the circumstances. But they would like to understand your capabilities better. And frankly, so would I. Tony crossed his arms, the armor's servos whirring softly. Let me be clear about something, Captain. I've spent years protecting my technology from people who wanted to weaponize it. Governments, corporations, terrorists. Everyone wants a piece of Iron Man tech because they see it as the ultimate weapon. I've watched people try to reverse engineer my armor, steal my designs, build knockoffs. Some of them succeeded, and people died because of it. I understand your concerns, Picard said. But the Federation is not trying to steal your technology for weapons development. We're simply trying to understand what we're dealing with. And if I refuse? Silence settled over the room. Tony saw the careful looks exchanged between the senior officers, Worf's hand resting near his phaser, Troy's empathic assessment, Data's analytical observation. These people were deciding how much of a threat he represented. Counselor Troy spoke softly. Mr. Stark, I sense that you're someone who's been betrayed before. Someone who's learned to trust his own judgment over others' promises. That's a protective mechanism, and it's probably kept you alive. But it's also isolating you in a universe where you desperately need allies. Tony turned to face her directly. Counselor, I appreciate the psychological insight, but you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through or why I have trust issues. You're right, Troy acknowledged. But I do know fear when I sense it. And right now, you're afraid. Not of us specifically, but of being vulnerable. Of giving up control in a situation where you have very little control to begin with. Damn, the telepath was good. All right, Tony said, uncrossing his arms. Cards on the table. Yes, I'm afraid. I'm stuck in another universe with no clear way home, surrounded by technology I don't fully understand, dealing with people whose motives I can't verify. In my universe, that's the setup for every bad scenario I've ever faced. So yeah, Counselor, I'm cautious. And I'm going to stay cautious until I have good reason not to be. That's fair, Picard said. Mr. Stark, let me propose a compromise. We won't demand access to your armor's internal systems or detailed technical specifications. However, would you be willing to allow Commander Data and Lieutenant Commander LaForge to conduct external scans and collaborate with you on understanding your arc reactor technology? A genuine scientific exchange rather than a one-sided examination? Tony considered that. External scans he could live with. His armor's outer layers were designed to resist sensor penetration anyway, and collaborating with Data and Geordi had actually been enjoyable. They were real engineers, not bureaucrats trying to weaponize everything they touched. I'll agree to collaboration, Tony said. Scientific exchange, both directions. I'll share information about my technology if you share information about yours. Data and Geordi only. No additional Starfleet personnel without my explicit approval. And I maintain full control over my armor at all times. Any attempt to confiscate, disable, or forcibly access my systems, and all cooperation ends immediately. Acceptable, Picard said. I'll inform Admiral Nechayev of these terms. She's not going to like them, Worf rumbled, his first contribution to the conversation. The Admiral will accept them, Picard said firmly, because they're reasonable terms from someone in Mr. Stark's position, and because forcing the issue would violate Federation principles regarding autonomy and consent. Tony was starting to understand why Data had mentioned Picard's reputation. The captain talked the idealism talk, but he also walked the walk, even when it meant pushing back against his own chain of command. "There's one more thing," Picard said. "The Romulan warbird that attacked you. We've been monitoring Romulan communications in this sector. They're claiming you destroyed one of their ships." "What?" Tony's HUD pulled up the engagement data. "That's bullshit. I hit their shields with repulsors, barely scratched them. Your phasers did more damage than I did." "We know," Picard said. "Our sensor logs confirm your account. But the Romulans are using the incident as justification for increased military presence in the neutral zone. They're claiming an unknown hostile force is operating in Federation space, threatening regional stability. So they're using me as an excuse to rattle sabers," Tony said. "Classic misdirection. Start a crisis, blame the other guy, use it as cover for whatever you were planning anyway." "That's our assessment as well," Picard confirmed. "Which means your presence here has become a diplomatic complication. The Romulans are demanding answers about who you are and what you're doing in this sector." "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," Picard said. "That you're a dimensional refugee who defended himself against an unprovoked attack. But I wanted you to be aware that your arrival has created ripples in the political situation here. The Romulans aren't the only ones who will be interested in you. The Cardassians, the Ferengi, possibly even the Dominion, if word spreads far enough. Everyone will want to understand what you represent." Tony felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. It was the same feeling he'd had when he became Iron Man, when he joined the Avengers, when he'd realized that every action he took affected thousands or millions of lives beyond his own. He'd come to this universe by accident, but as usual, his presence was about to make everything more complicated. "Captain," Tony said, quietly, "I've spent my whole life dealing with the consequences of my actions. Building weapons, then trying to stop weapons. Creating technology, then watching people corrupt it. I didn't ask to be here, but I'm not naive enough to think I can just hide until I find a way home. So here's what I need to know. What happens now?" Picard stood, walking to the observation windows and gazing out at the stars. "Now, Mr. Stark, you make a choice. You can stay aboard the Enterprise, where we can provide security and resources while you work on returning to your universe. Or we can arrange transport to a starbase or Federation world where you might have access to different facilities and expertise. Either way, you'll have Starfleet's support. But you should know that staying aboard the Enterprise means becoming involved in our missions. We're not a passenger liner. We're an exploration and defense vessel. We go where Starfleet sends us, and sometimes that means danger. If you remain with us, you'll be exposed to whatever situations we encounter." Tony walked to the window beside Picard, looking out at the infinite stars. In another universe, Earth was out there somewhere. Pepper was running Stark Industries, probably worried sick about where he disappeared to. Happy was probably investigating every lead trying to find him. Peter was probably feeling guilty, thinking somehow he should have prevented whatever happened. And Tony was here, wearing his armor in a universe that had evolved past the need for warriors like him. Or had they? "Captain," Tony said, "I think your Federation is remarkable. Seriously, you've built something that every version of humanity should aspire to. But I also think you're dangerously naive about the threats you face. You've got the Borg, the Dominion, the Romulans, and probably a dozen other species I don't know about yet, all looking for ways to exploit your idealism. And you're facing them with good intentions and technology you deliberately limit because you're afraid of becoming too militaristic. And you believe we should be more aggressive Picard said. It wasn't a question. I believe you should be more realistic, Tony corrected. In my universe, we learned that hoping for the best and preparing for the worst aren't mutually exclusive. You can believe in peace while still being ready for war. You can maintain your principles while still acknowledging that sometimes violence is the only language some enemies understand. Picard turned to face him directly. Mr. Stark, I've heard that argument before. Usually from people who want to justify preemptive strikes, military buildup, and the erosion of civil liberties in the name of security. The Federation was built on the principle that there's another way. And I respect that, Tony said. But I'm offering you something your principle-driven approach might not have considered. A perspective from someone who's lived through the consequences of being unprepared. I'm not saying abandon your ideals. I'm saying let me help you protect them. The room went quiet. Tony could feel the weight of attention from every officer present. Data's analytical observation, Worf's warrior's assessment, Troy's empathic reading, Geordi's engineer's curiosity, Crusher's physician's concern, and Picard's measured, careful consideration. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Stark? Tony smiled inside his helmet. Let me stay aboard the Enterprise. Let me work with your people, learn your technology, share mine where appropriate, and let me show you what Iron Man can do when threats show up that your principles can't stop. And in exchange? In exchange, Tony said, you help me get home when the time comes. And until then, you get the benefit of having someone around who doesn't play by your rules, which means I can handle situations your regulations won't allow. Picard studied him for a long moment. You're proposing to become our deniable asset, our way of solving problems without compromising Federation principles. I'm proposing to be myself, Tony corrected. And if that happens to solve problems for you, everyone wins. Picard turned back to the stars, silent. Tony waited, knowing the captain was weighing principles against pragmatism, ideals against reality. Finally, Picard spoke. I'll consider your proposal, Mr. Stark. But understand this. If you stay aboard my ship, you follow my orders in crisis situations. You don't endanger my crew, you don't violate Federation law, and you don't start wars we'll have to finish. Are we clear? Crystal, Tony said. Then welcome aboard the Enterprise, Mr. Stark. Let's hope we don't regret this. Tony extended his hand, and Picard shook it. Flesh meeting metal in a gesture that somehow felt like a treaty between universes. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake would change the course of Federation history. Because Tony Stark had just become the wild card the Star Trek universe never saw coming, 3 days aboard the Enterprise taught Tony Stark that the 24th century was both more advanced and more frustrating than he'd imagined. The technology was incredible. Replicators that could synthesize food and basic materials from pure energy, holographic environments that felt utterly real, medical scanners that could diagnose conditions in seconds. But the philosophy behind that technology drove him crazy. He'd spent the better part of 2 days in engineering with Geordi and Data, diving deep into Federation systems. The warp core's elegant physics, the transporter's quantum manipulation, the computer's isolinear processing, all of it was brilliant. But when Tony suggested modifications that could increase efficiency by 15%, Geordi had looked uncomfortable. We'd need to get approval from Starfleet engineering, Geordi had said. There are protocols for major system modifications, safety reviews, testing procedures, command authorization. I'm looking at your plasma flow regulators right now, Tony had argued. They're running hot because the magnetic containment fields aren't optimally aligned. I could fix that in 20 minutes with the right tools. And if something went wrong during warp travel, we could breach the containment and destroy the ship. Geordi had countered. I'm not saying you're wrong, Tony. I'm saying we need to be careful. Careful. The word seemed to define everything about Starfleet. Careful exploration, careful diplomacy, careful technological advancement. It was responsible, methodical, and utterly at odds with Tony's approach of breaking things to understand them, then rebuilding them better. Now Tony stood in his assigned quarters, spacious, comfortable, and depressingly bland, running diagnostics on his armor for the dozenth time. The Mark 85 was holding up well, but without manufacturing capabilities, he couldn't replace damaged components or expand his ammunition reserves. The arc reactor remained at 94% efficiency, which was good for months of operation. But his nanite reserves were down to 78% after the Romulan engagement, and every repair consumed more of his limited supply. He needed access to a fabrication facility, preferably one where he could work without Starfleet looking over his shoulder. The door chimed, the Enterprise's polite way of announcing visitors. Tony had disabled the automatic entry authorization within an hour of moving in. Old habits from living in Stark Tower, where Friday controlled access to everything. "Who is it?" Tony called out. "Counselor Troy, Mr. Stark. May I come in?" Tony grimaced inside his helmet. The ship's empath. She'd been mostly absent since their first meeting. But Tony had felt her presence occasionally. A subtle weight of attention during meals in 10 Forward. A moment of eye contact in the corridors. She was studying him, reading his emotional patterns, building a psychological profile. He didn't like being studied, but refusing to talk to her would only make him look defensive. And maybe, just maybe, she could provide insight into the cultural dynamics he was navigating. "Come in," Tony said, keeping his faceplate down. The doors slid open, and Counselor Troy entered, carrying 2 beverages. She wore civilian clothes rather than her uniform, a flowing dress in deep burgundy that somehow made her seem less official, more approachable. Calculated, Tony thought. Everything about her was calculated. "I brought tea," Troy said, setting 1 cup on the table. "Earl Grey, hot. It's the captain's favorite, though I suspect you prefer coffee." "Jarvis used to make perfect espresso," Tony said, not moving toward the beverage. "Triple shot, exact temperature. But I can't replicate that here because I don't have my AI to remember the specifications, and the replicator's definition of coffee tastes like someone described coffee to a computer that had never actually tasted it." Troy smiled. "You miss your AI?" "I miss having support systems," Tony corrected. "Friday wasn't just a voice in my helmet. She was tactical analysis, threat assessment, system management, and about 1,000 other functions I handled manually now. Without her, I'm operating at maybe 60% efficiency." "That must be difficult," Troy said, sitting in one of the chairs and sipping her tea. "Being dependent on technology, then suddenly losing that dependence." "I'm not dependent on technology," Tony said sharply. "I use technology as a tool. There's a difference." "Is there?" Troy's voice remained gentle, but Tony heard the challenge beneath it. "From what I sense, you feel diminished without your AI, vulnerable, less capable than you were in your own universe." Tony's jaw tightened. "Counselor, is this a social visit or a therapy session? Because I didn't ask for therapy." "It's whatever you need it to be," Troy said. "But I've been observing you for 3 days, Mr. Stark. You're brilliant. Everyone in engineering says so. Your grasp of our technology is remarkably fast. But you're also isolated. You spend all your time working, analyzing, planning. You don't interact with the crew socially. You keep your armor on constantly, and you're carrying considerable anxiety about your situation." "Of course I'm anxious," Tony snapped. I'm stuck in another universe with no clear path home. Anyone would be anxious. True, Troy acknowledged. But your anxiety goes deeper than that. You're afraid of being powerless. You compensate by trying to control every variable, understand every system, maintain constant vigilance. The armor isn't just protection. It's a barrier between you and a universe you don't trust. Tony walked to the window, looking out at the stars sliding past at warp speed. Damn. The empath was getting uncomfortably close to truths he didn't want to examine. In my universe, Tony said quietly, I learned that letting your guard down gets people killed. I watched a kid, Peter Parker, brilliant kid, best of us, disintegrate because I didn't see the threat coming soon enough. I watched half the universe die because we weren't prepared. So yeah, counselor, I have control issues. Because the alternative is watching people I care about suffer for my failures. Troy's emotional resonance shifted. Tony couldn't sense it consciously, but something in the room's atmosphere changed. Sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. That's a terrible burden to carry, Troy said softly. Believing that you're responsible for protecting everyone, that any failure is your personal fault. It is my fault, Tony said. I built Ultron. I didn't see Thanos coming. I made the call to use the Time Stone, and that's what led to... He stopped himself. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I learned my lesson. Stay vigilant. Stay prepared. Trust your own judgment because everyone else will let you down eventually. That sounds exhausting. It's survival. Troy set down her tea and stood, walking to join him at the window. Mr. Stark, I'm not going to try to analyze away your protective mechanisms. They've clearly kept you alive. But I will say this. You're not in your universe anymore. The rules here are different. The people here are different. And holding on to strategies that worked there might prevent you from adapting to here. Meaning that maybe, just maybe, you could try trusting someone besides yourself. The crew of the Enterprise has faced threats you can't imagine. The Borg, Q, temporal anomalies, species from other dimensions. We've survived because we work together, because we trust each other, because we believe in something larger than individual capability. Tony turned to face her. And that works great until you meet an enemy who doesn't share your values, who sees your trust as weakness and your cooperation as vulnerability. What then, counselor? Then we adapt, Troy said simply. But we don't abandon our principles out of fear. That's the difference between your universe and ours, I think. You've learned to expect betrayal. We've learned to hope for better. Before Tony could respond, the ship's intercom crackled. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Captain Picard to all decks. Prepare for combat situation. The lighting shifted to crimson, and alarm klaxons began their urgent wailing. Tony's HUD immediately activated full combat protocols, weapon systems charging, sensors expanding to maximum range. What's happening? Tony demanded. Troy's expression had gone tense and focused. We're under attack or detecting an imminent threat. I need to get to the bridge. I'm coming with you, Tony said, already moving toward the door. Mr. Stark, you're not part of the command structure. Counselor, I'm wearing a mobile weapons platform and your ship is going into combat. Either I'm on the bridge where I can help, or I'm down here wondering what's happening. Which do you think is better? Troy hesitated for only a moment. Follow me, but stay out of the way and follow the captain's orders. They ran through the corridors, crew members rushing to stations with practiced efficiency. No panic, Tony noted, just calm, professional urgency. Whatever threat they faced, the Enterprise crew had done this before. The turbo-lift ride to the bridge felt eternal despite taking only seconds. When the doors opened, Tony stepped onto the command deck of a starship for the first time and immediately understood why Picard commanded such respect. The bridge was a masterpiece of functional design. Stations arranged in concentric circles around the captain's chair, view screen dominating the forward wall. Every officer focused on their task with absolute concentration. Picard sat in the center, the still point around which ordered chaos revolved. "Report," Picard commanded as Troy moved to her station beside him. "Captain, we're detecting 3 Romulan warbirds decloaking directly ahead," Data reported from his operations station. "They are powering weapons and raising shields. Hostile intent confirmed." On the view screen, 3 predatory vessels materialized from nothing, the same aggressive design Tony had seen before, but now in formation and clearly coordinated. This wasn't a random encounter. This was an ambush. "Shields up," Picard ordered. "Red alert. Open hailing frequencies." "Hailing frequencies open, sir," Worf growled from tactical. "Romulan vessels, this is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. You are in violation of the Neutral Zone Treaty. Explain your presence immediately." The view screen shifted to show a Romulan commander, angular features, calculating eyes, wearing the military uniform of someone who'd risen through ranks by being both competent and ruthless. "Captain Picard, how convenient. We are here for the dimensional anomaly you harbor aboard your ship. The entity that attacked our vessel 3 days ago. Surrender it to us immediately, or we will take it by force." Tony stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "I'm the dimensional anomaly, and I'm not an it. I'm Tony Stark, and I didn't attack your ship. I defended myself when your people decloaked behind me with weapons hot." The Romulan commander's expression shifted to predatory interest. "Ah, the anomaly speaks, and carries himself with considerable arrogance for someone so far from home. I am Commander Telek of the Romulan Star Empire. Your presence in our space is an act of aggression, and your technology represents a threat to regional stability. You will surrender to Romulan custody for interrogation." "Not happening?" Tony said flatly. "Then you choose war," Telek said. "Captain Picard, you have 1 minute to transport the anomaly to our custody, or we will disable your ship and take him by force." The transmission cut off. Picard turned to face Tony, his expression tight with barely controlled frustration. "Mr. Stark, get off my bridge, now." "Captain, that is an order," Picard said. "You will return to your quarters immediately and remain there until this situation is resolved. Security, escort Mr. Stark." "Belay that order," Tony interrupted. "Captain, those ships are here because of me, because I'm a piece of unknown technology they want to dissect. You really think they're going to let the Enterprise just fly away after you refuse to hand me over? This is an excuse for a fight they were looking for anyway." "That may be true," Picard said coldly, "but this is my ship, my crew, and my command decision. I will not hand over a guest to hostile forces, but neither will I allow you to interfere with bridge operations during a combat situation. Now get off my bridge before I have security remove you." Tony's targeting systems had automatically locked onto all 3 warbirds, calculating optimal attack vectors, shield frequency analysis, vulnerable points on each hull. He could launch right now, hit them before they fully coordinated, maybe even disable one before they... No, that's not what this universe needed. That's not what Picard needed. Tony forced himself to step back, to override every combat instinct screaming at him to act. "Fine, Captain. Your ship, your rules. But when this goes sideways, and it will, you know where to find me." He turned and walked toward the turbo lift, feeling every eye on the bridge tracking his movement. Counselor Troy caught his gaze as he passed, and her expression carried a mixture of understanding and concern. The turbolift doors closed, cutting off his view of the bridge. The lift began descending, and Tony immediately overrode the destination controls, routing himself not to his quarters, but to the transporter room. Friday, plot optimal engagement vector against 3 Romulan warbirds, he said out of habit, then caught himself. Right. No Friday. Fine. Manual it is. If Picard wanted to handle this diplomatically, that was his call. But Tony Stark hadn't survived as Iron Man by trusting diplomacy alone. And if those Romulans wanted a fight, they were about to learn that some anomalies fought back. Tony materialized in space 300 meters behind the Romulan warbird formation, his armor's stealth systems engaged and thruster output minimized to reduce his sensor signature. The Enterprise hung in the distance like a glowing jewel surrounded by 3 predatory birds of prey, disruptor banks charging, shields shimmering with deadly potential. He'd bypassed the transporter room security by accessing the computer through wireless protocols data had inadvertently shown him during their engineering sessions. Starfleet's computer systems were sophisticated but trusting. They didn't expect internal threats, which made them vulnerable to someone who knew how to exploit that trust. His HUD displayed tactical overlay. 3 D-Deridex-class warbirds, each approximately twice the Enterprise's mass, armed with disruptor arrays and plasma torpedoes. Shield strength estimated at 85% on all 3 vessels. They were positioned in a standard Romulan attack formation, 2 flanking, 1 central, ready to coordinate fire on the Enterprise's weakest shield facings. This was going to get messy. Tony's comm systems picked up the ongoing exchange between Picard and Commander Telek, the Romulans' ultimatum ticking down with ruthless precision. 30 seconds, Captain Picard. Telek's voice crackled across subspace. Surrender the anomaly or face the consequences. Commander, we will not comply with your unlawful demands, Picard responded, his voice carrying absolute conviction. The individual you seek is under Federation protection. If you attack this vessel, you will be starting a war between the Romulan Star Empire and the United Federation of Planets. Then let history record that the Federation started this war by harboring an interdimensional threat, Telek replied. Time's up, Captain. The warbird's disruptor arrays lit up like emerald stars. Tony moved. He accelerated at maximum burn, arc reactor feeding every ounce of power to his thrusters and repulsors. The armor screamed through vacuum at velocities that would have liquefied an unprotected human. But Tony's inertial dampeners, crude compared to the Enterprise's but functional, kept him conscious and combat ready. The lead warbird never saw him coming. Tony slammed into the ship's port nacelle at relativistic speed, repulsors firing at point-blank range directly into the shield generator. The impact was like hitting a brick wall wrapped in electrical current. His HUD flooded with warnings as shields and armor contested space in the explosion of electromagnetic fury. But Tony had calculated the angle perfectly. His repulsors, designed to punch through Ironmonger's armor and Chitauri Leviathans, found the resonant frequency of the Romulan shields. The shields collapsed in that section. Before the Romulans could compensate, Tony fired a cluster of micro-missiles directly into the exposed nacelle. The explosions tore through the ship's warp coil assemblies, sending cascading energy, feedback through the propulsion systems. The warbird lurched sideways, its starboard maneuvering thrusters firing desperately to compensate for the catastrophic damage. This is Iron Man to Enterprise, Tony broadcast on all frequencies. Sorry, Captain, but I'm not the wait and hope diplomacy works type. Engaging hostile forces, you might want to take advantage of the distraction. The comm erupted with Picard's voice, tight with fury. Mr. Stark, stand down immediately. That is a direct order. Not part of your command structure, remember? Tony replied, already accelerating toward the second warbird. "You handle things your way, I'll handle them mine. Let's see which approach keeps your crew alive." The two remaining warbirds had broken formation, one moving to engage the crippled lead ship's attacker, Tony, while the other maintained targeting lock on the Enterprise. Smart tactical division. They'd recognized him as a threat, but weren't abandoning their primary objective. The Hamas second warbird fired. Disruptor bolts lanced through space, Emerald Death seeking to vaporize this audacious insect. Tony's combat subroutines calculated trajectories in microseconds, his armor's thrusters firing in controlled bursts that looked random, but were precisely orchestrated chaos. He jinked left, dove, rolled through 3 dimensions in ways that capital ships simply couldn't match. Most of the shots missed. One connected. The disruptor bolt hit his right shoulder assembly, and Tony's world exploded in pain and warning klaxons. His HUD showed catastrophic damage to the shoulder actuators, armor integrity down to 34% in that section, nanites desperately trying to seal the breach. The smell of burning electronics filled his helmet. "Okay," Tony gasped, gritting his teeth against the pain radiating through his shoulder. "That hurt. Friday, reroute power." He caught himself again. "No Friday, manual reroute. Come on, Stark, you built this thing. You know every circuit." His fingers flew across holographic controls inside the helmet, bypassing damaged systems and redistributing power flow. The shoulder assembly remained compromised, but he could still fly, still fight. That was enough. The second warbird was lining up another shot when the Enterprise finally engaged. Twin phaser beams, brilliant amber lances of concentrated energy, struck the warbird's forward shields with overwhelming force. The Romulan ship's shields held, but barely, buckling under the Enterprise's superior firepower. Photon torpedoes followed, orange spheres of antimatter contained in magnetic bottles, slamming into the weakened shields with explosive fury. Picard's voice cut across the tactical frequency, addressing the Romulan commander. "Commander Telek, I warned you. Stand down now, or we will disable all 3 of your vessels." The third warbird, Commander Telek's flagship, responded by firing a full spread of plasma torpedoes at the Enterprise. The green spheres of superheated ionized gas streaked across space, each carrying enough destructive potential to gut a starship. The Enterprise's shields flared brilliant blue as they absorbed the impacts, energy readings spiking across Tony's sensors. But the shields held, barely. Tony recognized the tactical situation immediately. The Enterprise could probably take 1 warbird in straight combat, maybe even 2 if Picard was willing to push the ship to its limits. But 3 coordinated Romulan vessels, all firing in concert, would eventually overwhelm even Galaxy-class shields, which meant he needed to even the odds. The lead warbird, the one Tony had crippled, was still mobile despite its damaged nacelle. Disabled weapons, but functional shields and maneuvering thrusters. It was retreating, trying to put distance between itself and the combat zone. Tony couldn't let that happen. Injured enemies had a way of becoming reinforced enemies if you gave them time to call for backup. He plotted an intercept course, but his damaged shoulder limited his acceleration. The armor compensated as best it could, but he'd lost approximately 20% of his maneuverability. The warbird was pulling away, unless he did something stupid. Tony killed his thrusters entirely, letting momentum carry him forward while he diverted all power to repulsors. The Mark 85's arc reactor hummed at maximum output, feeding energy into weapons systems that hadn't been designed for sustained capital ship engagement. His hoodie screamed warnings about thermal overload, about exceeding safe operating parameters, about power distribution exceeding design specifications. He ignored all of it. At maximum range, farther than he'd ever attempted a precision strike, Tony fired. Twin repulsor beams lanced across 3,000 meters of vacuum, coherent energy streams that bent space itself with their passage. The beams struck the retreating warbird's aft shields at an angle calculated to exploit the weakened shield harmonics Tony's sensors had mapped during his initial attack. The shields held for exactly 2.3 seconds. Then they collapsed, and the repulsor beams carved burning trenches across the warbird's engineering section. Secondary explosions rippled through the hull as critical systems failed. The ship went dark, emergency power barely maintaining life support. 1 down, 2 to go. But Tony's arc reactor was at 76% and dropping fast. His armor's thermal systems were redlining. His shoulder was compromised, and he'd just expended ammunition reserves he couldn't replace. The Enterprise and the second warbird were trading fire in a deadly dance, shields flaring with each impact. Picard was good, his tactical officer better. But the Romulan commander was experienced and ruthless. And Commander Telek's flagship was maneuvering for an attack run that would catch the Enterprise between 2 firing solutions. Classic pincer. If both warbirds fired simultaneously on different shield facings, the Enterprise's shields would collapse. Then disruptors would tear through the hull, vaporizing sections, killing crew members, destroying the ship Tony had spent 3 days calling home. Not on his watch. Tony accelerated toward Commander Telek's flagship, his damaged armor protesting every burst of thrust. He was hurting, bleeding energy reserves, operating at maybe 60% combat effectiveness. But he was also Iron Man, and Iron Man didn't quit when the odds got bad. "Enterprise, this is Iron Man," he broadcast. "I'm going for the flagship. When I draw their fire, hit the second warbird with everything you've got. Disable it fast, then we'll deal with Telek together." "Mr. Stark," Picard's voice carried frustration and something that might have been grudging respect. "Your armor is damaged. You cannot survive concentrated fire from a warbird." "Probably not," Tony admitted. "But I can be annoying enough to make them try. That's all you need, Captain. A few seconds of distraction." He didn't wait for Picard's response. The flagship was already rotating to track him, disruptor arrays seeking lock. Tony wove through space in patterns that would have made test pilots vomit, pushing his damaged armor to limits that made his engineers back home weep. The flagship fired. Tony dodged left, and a disruptor bolt missed by centimeters. He rolled right, and another shot scorched his boot assembly. He dove, climbed, spiraled through 3 dimensions, while his arc reactor screamed and his shoulder burned and every system in his armor begged him to stop. But he didn't stop, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant the Enterprise faced 2 warbirds alone. And because somewhere in the back of his mind, Tony realized something. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for Picard's crew, for Data and Geordi and Troy and all the other people on that ship who treated him with respect and kindness, despite him being a heavily armed stranger from another universe. He was fighting to protect them, just like he'd fought to protect New York, to protect Peter, to protect everyone who couldn't protect themselves. It's what Iron Man did. The Enterprise's phasers carved through the second warbird's shields like surgical lasers, and photon torpedoes followed with devastating precision. The Romulan ship tried to evade, but Worf's targeting was perfect. The warbird's shields failed, its weapons arrays exploded, and it went dark. 2 down. Commander Telek's voice crackled across all frequencies, cold with fury. "Impressive, Captain Picard. Your pet anomaly fights well, but you've just guaranteed a war between our peoples. The Romulan Star Empire will not forget this aggression." "This was your aggression, Commander," Picard replied. "You violated the neutral zone. You attacked a Federation vessel without provocation, and you will answer for it." "Perhaps," Telek said. "But first, I will collect my prize." The flagship's shields reconfigured, concentrating forward. The ship accelerated directly toward Tony, disruptors firing in a continuous barrage that turned space into a curtain of emerald death. Tony's evasion protocols failed. Too many shots, too close together, too fast for his damaged systems to calculate escape vectors. A disruptor bolt caught his left leg. Another hit his chest plate. A third grazed his helmet, and his HUD flickered and died for a terrifying instant before backup systems engaged. He was going to die. The thought was clinical, detached. Arc reactor at 54%. Armor integrity critical across multiple sections. Nanites depleted. No manufacturing capability to repair. If he took another direct hit, the armor would fail. And in the vacuum of space, unprotected, he'd have maybe 15 seconds before a golden shimmer enveloped him. The sensation of transporter dematerialization was surreal even the second time, like being gently disassembled by angels while the universe held its breath. When the shimmer faded, Tony was standing in the Enterprise's transporter room, Geordi at the controls with an expression of grim determination. "Gotcha," Geordi said. "Welcome back, again." Tony's legs gave out. He collapsed to one knee, armor groaning, arc reactor flickering. "Good timing," he managed. "Another few seconds and I would have been vapor." "I know," Geordi said. "I was watching your armor's energy signature. When it dropped below 55%, I locked transporters and pulled you out." The intercom crackled. "Bridge to transporter room 3. Confirm Mr. Stark is aboard." "Confirmed, Captain," Geordi replied. "He's damaged but alive." "Tell Mr. Stark he and I will be having a very long conversation," Picard said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "After I finish dealing with the remaining Romulan vessel. Bridge out." Tony forced himself to stand, servos whining in protest. Through the transporter room's small window, he could see the Enterprise's phasers firing again, hammering Commander Telek's flagship. The Awa Romulan shields were failing, section by section, as Picard demonstrated exactly what happened when you pushed a diplomatic captain past his patience. The flagship turned and fled, cloaking as it retreated into the neutral zone. 2 disabled warbirds drifted in space, emergency lights flickering, crews scrambling to restore basic systems. The battle was over. Tony had survived, and Jean-Luc Picard was absolutely going to kill him. The observation lounge felt considerably less welcoming this time. Tony stood at rigid attention, or as close as his damaged armor could manage, while Captain Picard paced in front of the view screen like a professor dealing with a particularly troublesome student. The senior officers lined the table in silence. Data with his characteristic neutral observation, Geordi looking uncomfortable, Worf appearing almost approving, Troy radiating concern, and Dr. Crusher watching Tony's biosigns with professional worry. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched, broken only by the subtle hum of the Enterprise's engines and the occasional whir from Tony's damaged servo motors. Finally, Picard stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. "Mr. Stark," Picard said, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that was somehow worse than shouting. "In the 3 days you've been aboard this vessel, you have managed to violate ship security protocols, hack our transporter systems without authorization, engage enemy vessels against direct orders, and nearly start an interstellar war. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Tony's faceplate remained down, but he met Picard's gaze through the HUD display. "I saved your ship, Captain. Those 3 warbirds would have overwhelmed your shields eventually. Basic math, 3 coordinated vessels against 1, no matter how advanced. I changed the odds." "By disobeying orders," Picard said. "By taking unilateral military action that I explicitly forbade. By deciding that you knew better than the commanding officer of this vessel what needed to be done. Yes, Tony said simply. Because I did know better. You were preparing for a defensive engagement, hoping the Romulans would back down when faced with superior firepower. But Commander Telek wasn't bluffing, Captain. He came here with 3 ships and a plan. He was always going to attack. I just hit first. Worf rumbled his approval before catching Picard's sharp glance and falling silent. You do not get to make that determination, Mr. Stark, Picard said. On this ship, I am responsible for the safety of 1,014 crew members. Every decision I make considers their welfare, our mission parameters, Federation law, and the broader diplomatic implications of our actions. When you chose to engage those warbirds without my authorization, you usurped my command authority and placed my entire crew at risk. And when you hesitated, you risked letting those warbirds fire first, Tony countered. Captain, I respect your position. Really, I do. But we have fundamentally different philosophies here. You believe in exhausting diplomatic options, even when violence is inevitable. I believe in identifying threats early and neutralizing them before they can do damage. That philosophy, Picard said coldly, is how wars start, how conflicts escalate from manageable diplomatic incidents into full-scale hostilities that cost thousands of lives. The Romulans attacked us, yes, but by engaging them so aggressively, by crippling 3 of their vessels, you may have given their government exactly the justification they need to launch a broader offensive. Counselor Troy leaned forward. Captain, if I may, the Romulan Star Empire was already looking for an excuse. Commander Telek's approach, his demands, the way he positioned his ships, he came prepared for combat. Mr. Stark's assessment about the inevitability of violence may not have been wrong. That's not the point, Counselor, Picard said. The point is that Mr. Stark made a command decision that wasn't his to make. In doing so, he demonstrated that he cannot be trusted to respect the chain of command or Federation principles. Data tilted his head. Captain, I would note that Mr. Stark is not a Starfleet officer, and therefore is not bound by Starfleet regulations regarding chain of command. He is a civilian guest with his own autonomous decision-making capacity. While his actions were certainly unauthorized, they were not technically insubordination. Picard turned to Data with an expression that suggested the android had just made things significantly more complicated. Data, are you defending his actions? I am clarifying the parameters of his relationship to Starfleet authority, Data said. Mr. Stark operates under what he perceives as a moral imperative to protect others through direct action. His decision to engage the Romulan vessels, while tactically questionable from a diplomatic standpoint, was consistent with his established behavioral patterns and value system. His value system, Picard said, nearly got him killed. Dr. Crusher, report on Mr. Stark's condition. Beverly stood, medical scanner in hand. His armor took significant damage, approximately 40% structural integrity loss, multiple systems offline or operating at reduced capacity. More concerning is his physical condition. His biosigns show elevated stress hormones, minor internal bruising, consistent with high G maneuvers and significant fatigue. He's been running on adrenaline for the past hour. He needs rest, repairs, and probably medical treatment he won't accept. I'm fine, Tony interjected. The armor's medical systems are handling it. Your armor's medical systems are barely functional, Crusher countered. Your shoulder assembly is compromised, which means the suit's weight distribution is uneven. You're compensating physically, which is straining your musculoskeletal system. And your arc reactor dropped to 54% during combat. What happens when it goes lower? Does the armor shut down? Do you lose life support? Tony was silent. She'd identified the exact problem he'd been avoiding thinking about. The arc reactor could sustain the armor for months at low power, but combat operations drained it dramatically. Another engagement like the Romulan battle, and he'd be operating on emergency reserves. And without manufacturing capabilities to produce replacement components, every bit of damage was permanent. "Mr. Stark," Picard said, his voice softening slightly, "I understand why you acted. I truly do. You saw a threat and responded the way you've been trained to respond. But you're not in your universe anymore. The rules here are different. Starfleet operates on principles of measured response, diplomatic resolution, and collective decision-making precisely because we've learned the cost of unilateral military action." "I've learned the cost of inaction," Tony replied quietly. "I've watched people die because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't prepared enough, wasn't willing to make the hard call. So forgive me, Captain, if I'd rather act and face consequences than hesitate and watch your crew become casualties." The observation lounge fell silent. Tony could feel the weight of attention, the senior officers processing his words, measuring his sincerity against his actions. Geordi broke the silence. "Captain, for what it's worth, the tactical analysis supports Mr. Stark's assessment. Those warbirds were positioned for an alpha strike, concentrated fire designed to overwhelm our shields before we could respond effectively. If they'd fired first with all 3 ships coordinated, we would have taken significant damage. Mr. Stark's engagement disrupted their formation and forced them to split their attention. And in doing so, he violated the Prime Directive's spirit, if not its letter," Picard countered. "We don't start fights, Mr. LaForge. We finish them when necessary, but we don't fire first. Unless firing first is the only way to protect your crew," Tony said. "Captain, you keep talking about principles and regulations like they're sacred. But what about the principle of protecting the people under your command? What about the regulation that says a captain's first duty is to his ship and crew?" Picard's expression shifted. Not anger now, but something deeper. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Mr. Stark," Picard said, quietly, "I have sent people to their deaths following Federation principles. I have watched crew members die because I chose diplomacy over immediate violence. And yes, sometimes I wonder if different choices would have saved them. But I also know that the moment we abandon our principles out of fear, the moment we choose preemptive violence over measured response, we become exactly what we're fighting against. Unless what you're fighting against doesn't care about your principles," Tony said. "The Borg you mentioned, do they negotiate? Do they respond to diplomacy?" Picard's jaw tightened. "No. The Dominion? They value strength and pragmatism. The Romulans? They respect power and cunning. So all your major threats," Tony said, "are enemies who see your diplomatic approach as weakness to exploit. And you maintain that approach anyway, because... why? Because it makes you feel morally superior? Because it lets you sleep at night knowing you didn't compromise your ideals? Because," Picard said, his voice hard as steel, "the alternative is to become the very monsters we fight. Because the moment we decide that our fear justifies any action, any violence, any compromise of our values, we lose the thing that makes us worth defending. We become an empire built on force rather than a federation built on cooperation." Tony wanted to argue. Every combat instinct, every lesson learned from years of fighting aliens and gods and madmen told him that Picard's idealism was dangerous. That in a hostile universe, the side that hesitated lost. That peace through strength was the only guarantee of survival. But there was something in Picard's conviction that gave him pause. This wasn't naive optimism. This was a battle-hardened captain who'd seen horrors, the Borg, clearly, and chosen to maintain his principles anyway. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Maybe there was something to that. "All right," Tony said finally. "I hear you, Captain. We disagree on methods, and we're probably going to keep disagreeing. But I'll make you a deal. I'll respect your command authority aboard this ship. No more unauthorized operations, no more hacking your systems, no more ignoring orders. But in exchange, I need you to respect my judgment when I tell you a threat is imminent. If I say violence is inevitable, you at least consider the possibility that I'm right." Picard studied him for a long moment. "That's surprisingly reasonable coming from someone who just violated every protocol on this ship." "I'm capable of learning," Tony said. "Sometimes, when the lesson doesn't get me killed." Worf spoke for the first time, his deep voice rumbling. "Captain, the Romulan Empire will respond to this incident. Commander Telek will report that Federation forces engaged his vessels aggressively. They will demand reparations or threaten military action." "I know," Picard said. "I've already contacted Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev is less than pleased. There will be diplomatic fallout. But our sensor logs clearly show the Romulans violated the neutral zone first and issued an ultimatum before we engaged. We were defending ourselves." "With significant help from Mr. Stark," Data observed. "The Romulans now know that a dimensional refugee with advanced combat capabilities is allied with the Federation. That changes their threat assessment." "I'm not allied with the Federation," Tony corrected. "I'm allied with this ship. There's a difference." "Is there?" Troy asked gently. "You risked your life to protect this crew. You engaged 3 warbirds knowing you might not survive. That sounds like alliance to me." Tony was silent. She was right, and he hated that she was right. Somewhere between studying the warp core and arguing philosophy with Picard and running diagnostics with Geordi, he'd started giving a damn about these people. Started seeing them as more than just resources to exploit for his own return home. Started seeing them as crew, as teammates, as friends maybe. "Fine," Tony said. "Call it whatever you want. But the fact remains, the Romulans want me, and they're willing to start a war to get me. So what's the plan, Captain? Because hiding behind Federation principles won't stop Commander Telek from trying again, and next time he'll bring more ships." Picard returned to his chair, steepling his fingers in that characteristic gesture. "The plan, Mr. Stark, is that we continue our mission while Starfleet handles the diplomatic situation. The Enterprise is due to rendezvous with Deep Space Nine in 4 days for resupply and crew rotation. DS-9 is a Federation starbase in the Bajoran sector, administered jointly with the Bajoran Provisional Government. It's also strategically positioned near the Cardassian border and the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant." "Why are we going there?" Tony asked. "Because," Picard said, "Starfleet wants you somewhere more secure than a starship. DS-9 has extensive research facilities, manufacturing capabilities, and significantly better defensive systems than the Enterprise. If the Romulans do attempt another operation to capture you, they'll have to contend with a space station's defenses rather than a single ship." Tony's tactical mind immediately started calculating. A space station, fixed position, probably heavily armed, potentially vulnerable to siege tactics, but also better manufacturing, which meant he could finally repair and upgrade his armor. Access to Federation databases, research facilities, maybe even collaboration with other scientists and engineers. It was a trade-off. More resources, less mobility. "What about getting home?" Tony asked. "You mentioned studying the quantum signatures that brought me here. Any progress on that front?" Data answered. "I have analyzed the subspace rupture characteristics extensively. The dimensional barrier between universes appears to require immense energy to breach, approximately equivalent to a warp core breach or comparable energetic event. Recreating those conditions safely is theoretically possible, but would require specialized equipment we do not currently possess. DS9 has that equipment? Possibly, Data said. The station has research facilities devoted to studying the Bajoran wormhole, a stable passage to the Gamma Quadrant that exhibits some dimensional properties. Scientists there may have insights into interdimensional travel that could help us devise a method for returning you to your universe. Or trap me here permanently, Tony muttered. Or that, Data agreed with android honesty. Picard stood. Mr. Stark, you have 4 days to consider your options. You can remain aboard the Enterprise as we travel to DS9, or you can take a shuttlecraft and strike out on your own. But I'll be honest with you. The galaxy is dangerous for someone unfamiliar with its politics, species, and territories. And the Romulans aren't the only ones who'll be interested in someone with your capabilities. Meaning? Meaning, Picard said. That word of the dimensional refugee who fought 3 Romulan warbirds is going to spread. The Cardassians will want to study you. The Ferengi will want to profit from you. Section 31. He paused, as if he'd said more than intended. Other parties will see you as either an asset or a threat. Staying with Starfleet offers protection, resources, and the best chance of eventually returning home. Tony caught the mention of Section 31 and filed it away for later investigation. Some kind of shadow organization, clearly. Intelligence service, probably. The kind of people who'd absolutely want to get their hands on an interdimensional engineer with advanced technology. I'll stay, Tony said. For now. But Captain, understand something. I'm cooperating because it serves my interests. I'm not joining Starfleet. I'm not becoming a Federation citizen. And if I decide this arrangement isn't working, I'm gone. Clear? Crystal clear, Mr. Stark, Picard said. Now get to sickbay. Dr. Crusher will examine you whether you like it or not. And after that, engineering. Your armor needs repairs, and I suspect Geordi is dying to see what makes it tick. Just the external repairs, Tony said. The internal systems stay locked. Understood, Geordi said, grinning. But I'm still going to ask about 1,000 questions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Tony replied. As the senior officers filed out, Tony found himself alone with Picard for a moment. The captain studied him with that measured, analytical gaze. Mr. Stark, Picard said quietly, you fought well today. Your tactical instincts are sound, your courage undeniable. But courage without discipline is just recklessness. And in space, recklessness kills not just the reckless, but everyone around them. I know, Tony said. I've lost people because of my recklessness. It's why I'm trying, really trying to work within your system. But, Captain, if another situation like today happens, if I see your crew in danger and hesitating means casualties, I'm going to act. I can't not act. It's who I am. Picard nodded slowly. Then let's hope we don't face such situations. Because next time, Mr. Stark, the consequences might be worse than a lecture in the observation lounge. Tony watched Picard leave, the captain's words echoing in his helmet. 4 days to Deep Space Nine. 4 days to figure out whether Tony Stark could exist in a universe that valued cooperation over individual action, diplomacy over preemptive strikes, idealism over pragmatism. 4 days to decide whether Iron Man could become something other than a weapon. Tony looked out at the stars streaming past at warp speed and wondered if any universe was ready for that answer. Deep Space Nine. Hung against the backdrop of Bajor like a mechanical flower frozen mid-bloom. The station's distinctive architecture, 3 docking pylons extending from a central core surrounded by a rotating habitat ring, spoke of Cardassian engineering overlaid with Federation modifications. It was massive, easily 3 times the Enterprise's size, and bristling with weapons arrays that made Tony's tactical subroutines purr with appreciation. Impressive, Tony murmured from his position at the observation lounge window. His armor had spent the last 4 days in various states of repair, Geordi working miracles with Federation technology while Tony provided carefully edited specifications. The shoulder assembly was functional again. Nanite reserves replenished through a complex replicator program Tony and Data had developed together. Arc reactor back to 91% efficiency. He wasn't at full capacity, but he was combat ready, which was good because Tony's instincts were screaming that Deep Space Nine represented something significant. The station was constructed by the Cardassians during their occupation of Bajor, Data explained, standing beside him. It was originally designated Terok Nor and served as an ore processing facility. When the Cardassians withdrew, Starfleet assumed administration at the Bajoran Provisional Government's request. It has since become strategically vital due to its proximity to the Bajoran wormhole. The wormhole you mentioned, Tony said. Stable passage to another quadrant. That's the dimensional research facility you think might help me get home? Precisely. The wormhole is artificially maintained by non-corporeal entities the Bajorans worship as prophets. Its existence defies conventional understanding of spatial mechanics. Scientists studying its properties have made significant advances in understanding dimensional barriers and subspace topology. Tony filed away the detail about worshipped non-corporeal entities, maintaining a wormhole. Just another day in the 24th century, apparently. The Enterprise slid into docking position with practiced precision, connecting to one of the upper pylons with barely a tremor. Tony felt the subtle shift as the station's artificial gravity took over from the ship's systems, a seamless transition that spoke to remarkable engineering. Captain Picard to Mr. Stark, please report to Airlock 4. Captain Cisco is waiting to meet you. Tony activated his comm. On my way, Captain. Data accompanied him through the Enterprise's corridors toward the airlock. Crew members they passed offered nods of acknowledgement or curious glances at the armored figure who'd become a fixture aboard ship over the past week. Tony had spent most of that time in engineering or his quarters, but word had spread. The dimensional refugee who fought Romulan warbirds, who could discuss quantum mechanics with Data and match Geordi in engineering debates, who walked around in a self-contained fusion-powered combat suit. He'd become a legend, or at least a very interesting rumor. Airlock 4 opened onto DS9's promenade, a sweeping curved space that served as the station's commercial and social hub. The architecture was distinctly Cardassian. Gray bulkheads, harsh angles, utilitarian design overlaid with Federation attempts at warmth. Shops and restaurants lined the walkways. Species Tony had never seen mingling in a cosmopolitan chaos that reminded him of New York's diversity taken to galactic scale. Captain Benjamin Cisco stood waiting, flanked by several officers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who'd earned command through competence rather than connections. His eyes assessed Tony with the same tactical precision Tony was using on him. Two strategic thinkers taking each other's measure. Mr. Stark, Cisco said, extending his hand. Welcome to Deep Space Nine. I'm Captain Benjamin Cisco, Station Commander. This is my first. Officer Major Kira Nerys, Chief of Operations Miles O'Brien, Science Officer Jadzia Dax, and Chief of Security Odo. Tony shook Cisco's hand, firm grip, confident but not aggressive, then assessed the officers. Major Kira had the hard edges of someone who'd fought for survival, wearing a Bajoran uniform with the distinctive nose ridges of her species. O'Brien looked like a working engineer, comfortable with grease and problem-solving rather than politics. Jadzia Dax was striking. a trill, his HUD identified, with distinctive spots running down her temples and neck, carrying herself with unusual poise. And Odo. Tony's sensors struggled with Odo. The chief of security appeared humanoid, but registered as something entirely different. Some kind of shape-shifting liquid held in humanoid form. Fascinating and slightly terrifying. "Captain Cisco?" Tony acknowledged. "Appreciate the hospitality, though I'm guessing you're less than thrilled about hosting the guy who nearly started a war with the Romulans." Cisco's expression remained neutral, but Tony caught a flicker of amusement. "Let's just say Starfleet Command had some pointed questions about security arrangements. But Captain Picard speaks highly of you, and his recommendation carries considerable weight. So you're welcome here, Mr. Stark, provided you follow station regulations." "I'm getting used to following other people's rules," Tony said. "It's a work in progress." "Fair enough." Cisco gestured toward the promenade. "Let me show you around. DS9 isn't a starship, it's a community. About 2,000 permanent residents, another 1,000 transients at any given time. Multiple species, multiple governments, all coexisting in what can charitably be called controlled chaos." They walked through the promenade while Cisco provided orientation. Quark's Bar, a Ferengi establishment where Tony immediately noticed the proprietor, a short individual with massive ears, watching them with calculating interest. The Replimat, communal dining area, security office, infirmary, and at the far end, a viewport showing the Bajoran wormhole's location. "The wormhole opens periodically," Jadzia Dax explained, her voice carrying enthusiasm that suggested scientist rather than just Starfleet officer. "When it does, it's spectacular. A subspace passage connecting this quadrant to the Gamma Quadrant, 70,000 light-years away. The prophets, non-linear entities existing outside normal time, created and maintain it." "Non-linear?" Tony asked. "You mean time doesn't apply to them?" "Exactly. They experience past, present, and future simultaneously. Communicating with them is challenging." Tony's engineer mind raced with implications. Beings existing outside time who'd created a stable wormhole. That suggested control over dimensional barriers that went far beyond anything in his universe. If he could understand even a fraction of their technology, or whatever they used instead of technology, maybe he could recreate the quantum tunnel that brought him here. "I'd like to study the wormhole," Tony said. "Data mentioned the research here might help me get home. We've got some of the best scientists in the quadrant working on wormhole mechanics," Cisco confirmed. "You'll have full access to our research facilities. But Mr. Stark, I need to be direct with you. DS9 isn't just a research station. We're positioned at the intersection of multiple power struggles. Bajor's recovery from Cardassian occupation, tensions with the Cardassian Union, Dominion expansion from the Gamma Quadrant, and a dozen smaller conflicts. Trouble finds us regularly. And you're worried I'll make that worse," Tony said. "I'm worried," Cisco said carefully, "that someone with your capabilities and your proactive approach to threats might complicate an already complex situation. Major Kira, for instance, spent years fighting Cardassians during the occupation. She has strong opinions about preemptive action against oppressors." Major Kira met Tony's gaze directly. "The Cardassians occupied Bajor for 50 years. They killed millions, enslaved my people, stripped our world of resources. And they did it because they could, because we weren't strong enough to stop them. So yes, Mr. Stark, I understand acting before threats become catastrophes. Sometimes violence is the only language occupiers understand." Tony heard the pain beneath her words. The same kind of trauma Picard carried about the Borg, the same scars Tony bore from watching Peter disintegrate. Warriors marked by loss, shaped by fights they couldn't forget. "I'm not here to start fights, Major," Tony said. "But I'm also not here to watch people get hurt when I could have prevented it." "Then we'll get along fine," Kira said with a slight smile. Odo stepped forward, his liquid features solidifying into an expression of stern authority. "Mr. Stark, as Chief of Security, I need to make station regulations clear. You may wear your armor in public spaces, but weapons must remain saved unless actively defending against immediate threats. No unauthorized use of force, no vigilante operations, and any criminal activity, theft, assault, unauthorized access to secured systems will result in detention regardless of your status as a Federation guest." "Crystal clear, Chief," Tony said, recognizing the type. Law and order hardliner who'd enforce rules equally regardless of rank or circumstance. Exactly the kind of security officer a chaotic station needed. "I'll behave. Mostly. That's what concerns me," Odo said dryly. O'Brien cleared his throat. "On a more practical note, Mr. Stark, I've set up a workshop for you in one of the lower pylons. It's got fabrication equipment, computer access, and enough space for you to work on your armor without disturbing station operations. I've also compiled technical specifications for our major systems, in case you want to review them." Tony's estimation of O'Brien immediately rose. The chief understood what engineers needed: space, tools, and information. "That's perfect, Chief. I appreciate it. Don't mention it. Though if you've got time later, I'd love to pick your brain about your arc reactor. The energy density you're achieving is remarkable." Before Tony could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the station. Red alert lighting activated, and Cisco's comm badge chirped urgently. "Ops to Captain Cisco. We're detecting 3 vessels emerging from the wormhole. Jem'Hadar attack ships, sir. They're on approach vector for the station." Cisco's expression hardened. "Battle stations. Major, get to ops. Dax, weapons control. O'Brien, shields and power distribution. Odo, secure the promenade." He turned to Tony. "Mr. Stark, I need you to get somewhere safe." "Not happening, Captain," Tony interrupted, his armor's systems already coming online. HUD flooding with tactical data as sensors swept the approaching vessels. 3 attack ships, smaller than Romulan warbirds, but reading as heavily armed and shielded. And they were accelerating toward the station, with obvious hostile intent. "This is exactly what Cisco warned you about," Picard's voice said from behind them. The Enterprise captain had followed them onto the station. "Let Starfleet handle this." Tony pulled up the sensor data on his HUD. The Jem'Hadar ships were closing fast, and Deep Space Nine's weapons were powering up but slowly. The station had to rotate its weapons arrays into position, taking precious seconds. Seconds that could mean the difference between defended and damaged. "Captain Cisco?" Tony said. "Those ships are going to fire on the station before your defenses are fully online. Your shields will hold, probably, but you'll take damage. Unless someone gets out there and keeps them busy for 30 seconds. "Absolutely not," Picard said. "Noted," Tony replied. "Captain Cisco, permission to engage hostiles outside the station's defensive perimeter?" Cisco looked between Tony and Picard, calculation visible in his eyes. He was a tactical thinker, making a tactical choice, weighing principles against practicality in real time. "Granted," Cisco said. "But Mr. Stark, you follow my tactical officer's coordination. You're part of the defense grid, not a lone wolf. Understood?" "Understood, Captain." Tony was already moving toward the nearest airlock, armor systems routing full power to thrusters and weapons. Behind him, he heard Picard's frustrated voice calling after him. But Tony was done hesitating. The Dominion had come to Deep Space Nine, and Iron Man was going to show them what happened when you threatened his new home. Space near Deep Space Nine erupted into chaos. Tony launched from the airlock at maximum thrust, his arc reactor channeling every available watt into propulsion. The 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships were already within weapons range, their distinctive insectoid hulls, all angles and aggression, accelerating toward the station with single-minded purpose. His sensors painted them in crimson on his HUD, 150 meters each, phased polaron beam arrays, photon torpedoes, regenerative shielding. Dangerous, professional, and utterly committed to their attack run. Iron Man to DS9 Ops, Tony transmitted. I'm engaging. Give me targeting priorities and keep those shields up. Jadzia Dax's voice came back immediately, calm despite the crisis. Copy that, Iron Man. Designating targets Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Focus on Alpha. It's leading the formation. We need 20 seconds to bring our primary phaser arrays online. 20 seconds. Got it. Tony's HUD calculated intercept vectors while his tactical subroutines analyzed the Jem'Hadar attack pattern. They were coming in tight formation, overlapping shield coverage, coordinating fire solutions. Professional military tactics, these weren't pirates or opportunists. These were soldiers bred for combat, and their approach showed it. He had one advantage. They weren't expecting him. Tony dove beneath their formation, thrusters screaming as he pulled G-forces that would have liquefied an unprotected human. His armor's inertial dampeners groaned, but held. The lead Jem'Hadar ship, Alpha, rotated to track him, but capital ships couldn't match his maneuverability. By the time their weapons found his position, he was already somewhere else. He fired repulsors at Alpha's forward shields, concentrated beams designed to test their strength. The shields held. Regenerative technology absorbed and dispersed the impact efficiently. These weren't Romulan shields. They were built to sustain damage and keep fighting. He needed a different approach. DS9, what's their shield modulation frequency? Tony asked, already running analysis algorithms. Scanning, Dax replied. Reading polaron matrix operating at 257.4 terahertz, rotating through phase variants every 2.3 seconds. If you can match that rotation, I can match it, Tony interrupted. Data and Geordi's crash course in Federation shield technology was about to pay dividends. His armor's repulsors weren't designed for frequency modulation, but the arc reactor could adjust energy output patterns. It was crude compared to Federation phasers, but it might work. Alpha fired. Polaron beams lanced through space, coherent energy that tore through shields more efficiently than standard disruptors. Tony jinked left, and the beams missed by meters, close enough that his sensors registered ionization in their wake. 15 seconds, Dax called. They're closing on the station. Bravo and Charlie had ignored Tony, maintaining their attack vector toward DS9. Smart tactics. Don't get distracted by a single fighter when your objective was the station. But it also meant they'd committed to their approach, locked into trajectories that limited their maneuverability. Tony accelerated to intercept Bravo, his damaged but functional armor pushing limits that made warning klaxons sing. He came at the ship from its port quarter, a blind spot in most starship designs where sensors overlapped poorly. His HUD locked targeting solutions, calculating the precise angle and frequency modulation needed. He fired everything. Repulsors at modulated frequency, micro-missiles on ballistic trajectories, even his unibeam, a concentrated beam from his chest-mounted arc reactor array that he'd been saving for emergencies. The combined assault hit Bravo's port shields in a cascading overload, different frequencies and impact types overwhelming the regenerative matrix's ability to adapt. The shields flickered, failed for exactly 1.7 seconds. Tony's missiles punched through the gap, impacting the hull directly. Explosions rippled across Bravo's propulsion systems. The ship lurched sideways, losing formation cohesion, emergency power trying to compensate for catastrophic damage. "One down?" Tony transmitted. "Sort of. It's crippled but still operational." "Good enough." Cisco's voice cut in. "Alpha and Charlie are firing on the station. Our shields are holding, but we need those weapons online." Tony watched helplessly as Polaron beams hammered DS9's shields. The station's defensive grid was designed for this: overlapping shield generators, massive power reserves, redundant systems. But concentrated fire from 2 Jem'Hadar attack ships was nothing to dismiss. The shields held, but he could see power fluctuations in his sensor readings. 10 seconds, Dax said. "Keep them busy." Tony accelerated toward Alpha, the lead ship that had ignored him to focus on the station. These Jem'Hadar were disciplined. They wouldn't break formation to chase a single target when their mission objective was clear. But that discipline was also predictable. He positioned himself directly between Alpha and the station, hovering in space with repulsors aimed at the approaching ship. It was a ridiculous position tactically, making himself a stationary target. But it forced Alpha to make a choice: adjust aim to avoid him, or fire through him to hit the station. Alpha fired through him. Polaron beams tore through space where Tony had been hovering. But he'd already moved, thrusters firing at maximum as he dove beneath the beam paths with microseconds to spare. The beams continued past him, slamming into DS9's shields with devastating force. But they'd missed their optimal impact point. Instead of hitting a shield grid intersection, where multiple shield generators met and created weak points, the beams struck reinforced sections designed to absorb concentrated fire. 5 seconds, Dax called. Tony came around for another attack run on Alpha, but the Jem'Hadar ship had learned. It rotated to present its strongest shield facing, weapons tracking his approach with improved prediction algorithms. They'd analyzed his maneuvers and were adapting. He fired anyway, repulsors and missiles streaking toward Alpha's shields. Most were absorbed or deflected. A few got through, scarring the hull but not causing critical damage. These ships were built to take punishment and keep fighting. Charlie changed targets. Instead of continuing its attack on the station, it rotated toward Tony with predatory focus. The Jem'Hadar had decided he was enough of a threat to warrant their full attention. Both ships fired simultaneously. Alpha and Charlie, coordinated beams designed to catch him in a crossfire he couldn't evade. Tony's combat subroutines screamed warnings. No escape vector, no way to dodge both attack vectors. The geometry was perfect. The Jem'Hadar had boxed him in with professional precision. He did the only thing he could. He accelerated directly at Charlie, closing the distance at suicidal speed. The Polaron beams converged on his position half a second too late, striking empty space while Tony bore down on Charlie like a missile with delusions of grandeur. Charlie's crew realized too late what he was doing. They tried to rotate, to bring more weapons to bear, but capital ships couldn't pivot fast enough. Tony slammed into their forward shields at relativistic velocity, repulsors firing at point-blank range directly into the shield matrix. The impact was catastrophic, for both of them. Tony's HUD exploded with damage warnings as his armor's shields failed, then his outer armor plating buckled under forces it was never designed to handle. His arc reactor redlined, feeding emergency power to structural integrity fields that were all that kept him from being crushed. His left arm assembly shattered, systems going offline in cascading failure. His helmet cracked, atmosphere beginning to leak. But Charlie's forward shields collapsed entirely. The ship's bow crumpled where Tony had struck, hull integrity failing, emergency bulkheads slamming shut to contain the breach. The attack ship tumbled off course, its weapon systems offline, its crew desperately trying to regain control. Tony tumbled through space, armor failing, arc reactor at 31% and dropping, life support compromised. His HUD flickered, backup system struggling to maintain function. He couldn't feel his left arm. His right leg wasn't responding. And he could taste blood in his mouth from internal injuries the armor's medical systems were frantically trying to treat. But he'd bought the time DS9 needed. The station's phaser arrays came online with devastating precision. Massive Type 10 phaser banks, far more powerful than anything mounted on a starship, locked onto Alpha and fired. The amber beams were so concentrated, so powerful, that Alpha's shields lasted less than 2 seconds before catastrophic failure. The beams carved through the Jem'Hadar ship's hull like a laser through paper, striking critical systems with surgical accuracy. Alpha exploded. Not a dramatic fireball, space didn't work that way, but a rapid expansion of debris and venting atmosphere as the ship's power systems failed catastrophically. Photon torpedoes followed, orange spheres of antimatter streaking toward the crippled Bravo. The torpedoes impacted, and Bravo joined its sister ship in death, breaking apart in a cloud of metallic fragments. Charlie, the ship Tony had rammed, was already retreating, limping away from the station on emergency power, trying to escape before DS9's weapons could finish it. The station's phasers tracked it, but didn't fire. Cisco was letting it go, showing mercy or making a tactical choice to avoid unnecessary escalation. Iron Man, respond. Jadzia Dax's voice crackled in his failing comm system. Tony, we're reading critical damage. Activating emergency transport. The golden shimmer of transporter beam enveloped him, and Tony felt consciousness slipping away as the universe dissolved into shimmering energy. His last coherent thought was relief that he'd kept DS9 safe. Then darkness claimed him. Tony woke to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of medical equipment. His armor was gone. That was his first coherent realization. He was wearing a medical gown, lying in what looked like a Starfleet sickbay, surrounded by equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. Dr. Crusher stood beside his bed, medical scanner in hand, her expression professionally concerned. Behind her, Captain Cisco, Major Kira, and Captain Picard watched with varying expressions of concern, frustration, and reluctant respect. "Welcome back, Mr. Stark," Crusher said. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours while we repaired internal injuries, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and significant internal bleeding. You're lucky the transporter got you when it did. Another 30 seconds and your armor's life. Support would have failed completely." Tony tried to speak but found his throat raw. Crusher offered him water, and he drank gratefully before trying again. "The station? Casualties?" "The station's fine," Cisco said, stepping forward. "Minor shield damage, nothing critical, no casualties. Because you bought us the time we needed to bring our weapons online. The Dominion sent 3 attack ships to probe our defenses. You helped ensure they failed decisively. Your armor didn't fare as well." O'Brien's voice came from the doorway. The chief engineer entered carrying a damaged piece of metal. Tony recognized it as part of his left arm assembly. "We've got the pieces in a secure workshop. Most of it's repairable, but Mr. Stark, you pushed that suit far beyond its design specifications. Another impact like that, and the structural integrity would have failed completely." Tony closed his eyes. The Mark 85 had been his masterpiece, the culmination of years of design evolution. And he'd nearly destroyed it ramming a Jem'Hadar attack ship because it was the only tactical option available. "Worth it," he muttered. "Station safe. That's what matters." "Mr. Stark," Picard said, his voice carrying complex emotions Tony couldn't quite parse. You continue to demonstrate a disturbing pattern of nearly getting yourself killed to protect others. This is the second time in a week you've engaged capital ships in single combat and barely survived. Third time, actually, Tony corrected. There was the Chitauri in New York, but that was before. He stopped himself. Never mind. Point is, it worked. DS9 is intact, the Dominion got a bloody nose, and everyone learned that attacking Federation installations is expensive. Cisco pulled up a chair beside the bed. The Dominion also learned that Deep Space Nine has a dimensional refugee with advanced combat capabilities willing to ram attack ships to protect it. You've made yourself a target, Mr. Stark. And more importantly, you've made yourself a symbol. Symbol of what? Depends who you ask, Major Kira said, her expression thoughtful. To Starfleet, you're a loose cannon who gets results through methods they can't officially condone. To the Dominion, you're a new threat factor in their strategic calculations. To the Bajorans, she paused. Some of my people are calling you a warrior prophet, someone who fights for others without asking for anything in return. It's complicated. I'm not a prophet, Tony said flatly. I'm an engineer who wore a combat suit into battle because nobody else could. Nevertheless, Cisco said, you've become significant in ways that will have consequences. The Dominion won't forget this. They'll send detailed reports about you through the wormhole to their leadership in the Gamma Quadrant. The Founders, the changelings who rule the Dominion, will want to understand what you are and whether you represent a threat to their expansion. Tony processed that. The Founders, changelings, shapeshifters ruling an empire through genetically engineered soldiers. Another cosmic threat in a universe that seemed full of them. Captain Cisco, Tony said carefully, I didn't come here to start wars or become a symbol. I just wanted to help. To do what I do, protect people who can't protect themselves. That's what Iron Man is. I know, Cisco said, and that's why you're dangerous. Not because you're hostile, but because you act on conviction without fully understanding the consequences. Every time you engage in combat, you create ripples that affect political situations involving trillions of beings. So, what am I supposed to do? Tony asked. Stand by and watch when I could make a difference? Let people die because saving them might cause diplomatic complications? No, Cisco said firmly. You're supposed to learn that power, real power, isn't just about what you can do. It's about understanding what you should do. When to act and when to hold back, when violence is necessary and when it makes things worse. Tony met Cisco's gaze and recognized something there. The same burden Picard carried, the same weight Tony himself knew. The responsibility of command, of making impossible choices and living with the consequences. How do you do it? Tony asked quietly. How do you make those calls, knowing that people might die either way? You pray you're right, Cisco said, and you live with it when you're wrong. There's no other way. Silence settled over the room. Dr. Crusher checked her scanner one more time, then nodded. He needs rest. His body has been through significant trauma. I'm recommending 3 days of recovery before he even thinks about getting back in that armor. 3 days, Tony said. Gives me time to assess the damage and plan repairs. Chief O'Brien, I'll need to see the workshop you set up and access to your fabrication systems. Already arranged, O'Brien confirmed. When you're cleared for duty, I'll show you what we've got. Fair warning, though. Your armor's going to need extensive work. We're talking weeks, not days, to restore it to full functionality. Weeks. Tony's mind cataloged all the systems that needed repair, the nanites that needed replenishment, the structural components that needed fabrication. It was doable, especially with Federation replicator technology. but it meant he'd be vulnerable for an extended period. "Then I guess I'm staying on DS9 for a while," Tony said. "If that's your choice," Cisco said, "you're welcome here. But Mr. Stark, understand that DS9 attracts trouble. We're positioned at the intersection of too many conflicts. The Dominion, the Cardassians, the Maquis, internal Bajoran politics. Something is always happening here. If you stay, you'll be drawn into situations you can't predict." "Captain," Tony said, "that describes my entire life. I'm used to it." Cisco smiled slightly. "Then welcome to Deep Space Nine, Mr. Stark. Try not to destroy the station while you're here." As the officers filed out, leaving Tony alone with Dr. Crusher's final medical checks, he stared at the ceiling and thought about the battle. About ramming that Jem'Hadar ship because it was the only way to protect the station. About pushing his armor past its limits because people's lives depended on it. In his universe, that had made him Iron Man, the armored Avenger who stood between Earth and threats too big for conventional forces to handle. In this universe, apparently, it made him a symbol, a warrior prophet, a loose cannon who got results. Tony wasn't sure which identity fit better, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whether he was in his own universe or this one, whether he was dealing with Thanos or the Dominion, whether people called him hero or liability, he would keep fighting. Because that's what Iron Man did. And sometimes, the multiverse needed someone willing to take the hit so others didn't have to. 3 weeks on Deep Space Nine taught Tony Stark that the 24th century was exhausting in ways the 21st never prepared him for. The workshop O'Brien had set up became Tony's sanctuary, a converted cargo bay in the lower pylon, where he could work without interruption. His armor sat on a diagnostic platform like a patient on an operating table, components spread across workbenches in organized chaos. The Mark 85 had taken damage that would have been irreparable in his own universe. But Federation replicator technology changed the equation entirely. He'd spent the first week just understanding how replicators worked, matter synthesis at the molecular level, using transporter technology to assemble atoms into precise configurations. It was like having a 3D printer that could manufacture anything down to the atomic structure. The implications were staggering. The second week, he'd begun repairs, replacing the shattered left arm assembly, fabricating new nanite reserves using a hybrid process that combined his own specifications with Federation material science, reinforcing structural components with duranium alloys that were somehow stronger than his titanium gold composite. The third week, he'd started improving things. "You're adding phaser emitters to your repulsor arrays," Jadzia Dax observed, leaning against the workshop entrance with coffee in hand. She'd become a regular visitor, drawn by scientific curiosity and what Tony suspected was orders from Cisco to keep an eye on him. "Hybrid system," Tony confirmed, not looking up from his work. "Repulsor technology generates kinetic force through repulsor field manipulation. Phaser technology generates nadion particle beams that disrupt molecular cohesion. Combining them should give me variable damage types. Kinetic impact for shields, particle disruption for hulls." "That's brilliant," Dax said, moving closer to examine his work. "Though you'll need to recalibrate the power distribution systems. Phasers draw power differently than repulsors." "Already done," Tony said, gesturing to holographic schematics floating above the workbench. Arc reactor output gets routed through isolinear processing nodes, borrowed that from your computer core design, which can dynamically allocate power based on weapon selection. I lose about 8% efficiency to the conversion process, but the tactical flexibility is worth it. Dax studied the schematics with obvious appreciation. "You've learned an incredible amount about Federation technology in 3 weeks. Most engineers take years to understand isolinear processing at this level. I had good teachers, Tony said. Data's positronic brain processes information in ways that made explaining quantum mechanics actually logical. Geordie's visor let him see problems from electromagnetic perspectives I'd never considered. And O'Brien, he paused, smiling slightly. O'Brien understands that sometimes you fix things with inspired improvisation rather than by-the-book procedures. Speaking of O'Brien, Dax said, he wanted me to tell you that the station's shield generators in Section 42 are running hot again. He's wondering if you have any insights. Tony pulled up DS9's shield grid on his holographic display. The Cardassians designed this station with redundant systems that don't actually redundant properly. Section 42's generators are trying to compensate for load balancing issues in 41 and 43. Tell O'Brien to reduce power flow to 42 by 15% and increase it to the adjacent sections. The overall shield strength stays the same, but the thermal load distributes more evenly. I'll pass that along, Dax said. You know, you're becoming quite popular with the engineering staff. They're calling you the miracle worker from another universe. I just apply basic principles, Tony said. Though, I'll admit, having replicators makes engineering about 1,000 times easier than dealing with supply chains and manufacturing limitations. There's more to it than that, Dax said quietly. You see problems differently than we do. Federation engineers are trained to work within established parameters, to follow proven design principles. You look at our technology and immediately think, how can I make this better? It's refreshing, also occasionally terrifying. Tony finally looked up from his work. Terrifying. You're rebuilding your armor to incorporate Federation weapons technology without fully understanding the societal implications. We don't arm individuals with Starship-grade weapons, Tony. There are reasons for that. Because you're worried about individuals having too much power, Tony said. I get it. But in my universe, I learned that sometimes individuals are all that stand between civilization and extinction. The Avengers weren't a sanctioned military force. We were people with abilities who chose to act when governments couldn't or wouldn't. And how did that work out? Dax asked, not unkindly. Tony was silent for a long moment, memories flooding back. New York, Sokovia, the Raft, civil war among the Avengers, Thanos arriving when they were divided. Mixed results, he admitted finally. We saved a lot of people. We also caused a lot of damage. And in the end, when the real threat came, we weren't ready because we'd spent too much time fighting each other over whether we should exist at all. Dax sat down on a nearby workbench, her expression thoughtful. The Federation faced a similar question centuries ago. After developing warp drive, after making first contact with Vulcans, humanity had to decide what kind of species we wanted to be. We could have become a military power, using our technology to dominate other species. Some argued for exactly that, preemptive defense through overwhelming force. But you chose differently, Tony said. We chose cooperation, exploration. We built the Federation on the principle that diverse species working together achieve more than any one species can alone. And yes, sometimes that means we're slower to respond to threats. Sometimes it means we take damage we could have prevented with more aggressive postures. But it also means we've built something worth defending, a society where people like me can exist. People like you. Dax smiled enigmatically. I'm a Trill. My species has a symbiotic relationship with long-lived organisms called symbionts. The Dax symbiont inside me has lived for over 300 years, carrying the memories and experiences of 8 previous hosts. I'm Jadzia, but I'm also Curzon, Tarius, Layla, and 5 others. multiple lifetimes of experience in one person. Tony's engineer mind immediately started cataloging the biological implications, while his human side recognized the deeper meaning. You're saying the Federation created a society where something that unusual can exist openly, where you don't have to hide or defend what you are. Exactly. And that's what we're trying to preserve, not just lives, but the freedom to be different, to exist in ways that might seem strange or threatening to others. Your approach, Tony, building armor, preparing for threats, staying armed and vigilant, it comes from a good place. But it also assumes conflict is inevitable, that the universe is fundamentally hostile. Isn't it? Tony challenged. You've got the Borg, the Dominion, the Romulans. I've been here less than a month and I've already been attacked twice. True, Dax acknowledged. But we've also got the Vulcans, who taught us logic and emotional discipline. The Andorians, who are fierce warriors but loyal allies. The Bajorans, who maintain their spiritual identity through 50 years of occupation. The universe contains hostility, yes, but it also contains infinite possibilities for connection, understanding, and growth. Before Tony could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the station. His workshop's comm system crackled to life with Cisco's voice, urgent and commanding. All senior staff to ops immediately. We have a situation. Mr. Stark, you're needed as well. Tony and Dax exchanged glances, then both moved at once. Tony toward his armor, still partially disassembled but functional enough for combat, and Dax toward the door. What's the situation? Dax called into her comm badge. Kira's voice responded, tight with stress. A ship just came through the wormhole. It's broadcasting a distress signal, but sensors are reading weapon signatures consistent with Dominion technology, and it's heading straight for Bajor. Tony's armor snapped into place around him, systems coming online with familiar efficiency. The hybrid phaser repulsor arrays were untested. His arc reactor was at 89% after weeks of repair work, and his left arm assembly still had some calibration issues. But he was operational. More importantly, he was needed. They ran through the corridors toward Ops, DS9's command center located in the station's central core. The journey took 90 seconds, and when they arrived, Tony immediately understood why Cisco had sounded so urgent. The main view screen showed a vessel unlike anything Tony had seen in either universe. It was massive, easily twice the Enterprise's size, with organic curves that suggested biological growth rather than engineering. Jem'Hadar design aesthetics combined with something else, something that made his tactical subroutines scream warnings. Report, Cisco commanded from his position at the center of Ops. O'Brien worked his console with practiced efficiency. It's a Dominion battlecruiser, Captain. Reading significant damage, multiple hull breaches, power fluctuations, life support failing in several sections. But it's still armed, and its shields are at 60%. The distress signal? Cisco asked. Automated broadcast, Dax said, taking her position at the science station. Repeating the same message. This vessel has been commandeered by refugees fleeing Dominion oppression. We seek asylum with the Federation. Do not fire. Major Kira studied the tactical display with the practiced eye of someone who'd fought for survival. It could be a trap. The Dominion uses deception regularly. They could have loaded that ship with explosives, sent it toward Bajor, and were supposed to let it approach because of a distress signal. Or it could be genuine, Dax countered. We've had reports of resistance movements within Dominion territory, species forced to serve the Founders who want freedom. Tony stepped forward, his sensors already analyzing the ship. Captain Cisco, I'm reading power signatures consistent with weapons charging. Whatever's on that ship it's preparing for combat. Either it expects us to attack, or it's planning to attack us. Cisco's expression was granite. Hail them, all frequencies. Kira worked her console. Channels open, sir. Unknown vessel. This is Captain Benjamin Cisco of Deep Space 9. You are approaching Bajoran space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection. If your distress signal is genuine, we will provide assistance. But you will not approach Bajor with active weapon systems. Silence answered them for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then the view screen activated, and Tony found himself looking at something that made his blood run cold. The face was humanoid, but wrong. Pale skin with an unnatural smoothness, eyes that held something ancient and calculating. Features that seemed to shift subtly, as if the flesh itself was uncertain of its form. A founder, Tony's HUD identified based on Federation databases. A changeling, one of the shape-shifting rulers of the Dominion. But this one looked injured, damaged, frightened. Captain Cisco, the founder said, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested it wasn't entirely used to vocal communication. I am known as Las. I am not your enemy, though I come from those who consider you such. I and my companions have committed the greatest crime in Dominion law. We have chosen freedom over the Founder's great link. We have rejected the order of the Dominion and fled to find sanctuary among the solids. Solids, Cisco repeated. That's what Founders call non-changelings? Yes, it is. Not a term of respect in Dominion space. But I use it now without prejudice. We seek asylum, Captain. We are 18 souls aboard this vessel. 3 changelings, 8 Vorta, 7 Jem'Hadar. All of us have defected from Dominion service. All of us will be executed if returned. Kira's voice was hard. The Jem'Hadar are genetically programmed to serve the Founders. They can't defect. It's literally impossible. It was impossible, Las corrected. Until it wasn't. The Dominion has secrets, Major. Failures they hide from the galaxy. We represent one of those failures. Proof that their genetic programming can be overcome. That's why they will pursue us relentlessly. Why we need protection. Tony watched the view screen carefully, his sensors analyzing micro-expressions and physiological responses. If the Founder was lying, it was doing so flawlessly. But if it was telling the truth... Captain Cisco, Tony said quietly, if this is legitimate, if there are Dominion soldiers who've broken their programming and are seeking asylum, that's incredibly valuable intelligence and incredibly dangerous. The Founders won't let this stand. They'll send everything they have to either retrieve or eliminate these defectors. I'm aware, Mr. Stark, Cisco said. Then, to the view screen. Las, you're asking us to harbor defectors from a hostile power, to provide sanctuary that will make us targets for Dominion retaliation. Why should we take that risk? Because, Las said, and now its voice carried something that might have been desperation. We have information, knowledge of Dominion troop movements, strategic plans, genetic engineering programs, and weapons development. We offer this knowledge freely in exchange for protection. And because... It paused. Because you are the Federation. Because you claim to believe in freedom, in sanctuary for those fleeing oppression. I am asking you to live up to your principles, Captain, even when it's difficult. Cisco looked around Ops. At Kira's suspicious expression, at Dax's cautious optimism, at O'Brien's tactical concern, at Odo standing by the security console with an unreadable expression. Then he looked at Tony. Mr. Stark, you've fought the Jem'Hadar. What's your assessment? Tony considered his response carefully. Every tactical instinct screamed that this was too convenient, too perfectly designed to appeal to Federation sensibilities. But he also remembered what Dax had said, that the Federation was built on the principle that diverse beings could coexist peacefully, that it was worth defending precisely because it offered sanctuary to those who were different. "My assessment," Tony said, "is that whether this is genuine or a trap, you can't ignore it. If it's real, those defectors represent the first crack in Dominion solidarity, intelligence that could save thousands of lives. If it's a trap..." He paused. "Then we spring it carefully, with full precautions. But either way, Captain, you can't turn them away without investigation. That would violate everything the Federation stands for." Cisco nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. "Las, here are my terms. You will power down all weapon systems immediately. You will submit to a complete sensor scan of your vessel. You will transport to DS9 in small groups under heavy guard, while we verify your identities and stories. Any sign of deception, any indication this is a Dominion infiltration, and my Chief of Security will put you in holding cells so secure even changelings can't escape. Do you accept these terms?" "We accept," Las said immediately. "Thank you, Captain. You may be saving our lives. Or I may be condemning my station," Cisco said. "We'll find out which. Cisco out." The view screen went dark. The ops crew erupted into quiet but urgent activity. O'Brien coordinating security teams, Kira establishing sensor grids to monitor the Dominion vessel, Dax analyzing the ship's power signatures for anomalies, Odo preparing holding cells with changeling-proof containment fields. Tony stood beside Cisco, watching the organized chaos of a command crew handling a crisis. "You think they're telling the truth?" Cisco asked quietly. "I think," Tony said, "that you just made exactly the kind of impossible choice I was asking about earlier. Risk thousands to potentially save 18. Extend trust when suspicion would be safer. That takes courage I'm not sure I have. You rammed a Jem'Hadar attack ship to protect this station," Cisco said. "Don't talk to me about courage you don't have. You and I both know you'd make the same choice in my position." "Maybe," Tony admitted. "But I'd feel terrible about it." "That," Cisco said with a slight smile, "is what makes you dangerous, Mr. Stark. You do the right thing even when it hurts, even when you know it might get you killed. That's either heroism or insanity, and I'm not sure the universe can tell the difference." Over the next hour, the Dominion battlecruiser was methodically secured. The defectors were beamed aboard in groups of 3, each examined by Dr. Bashir, DS9's chief medical officer whom Tony hadn't officially met yet, and interrogated by Odo's security teams. The 3 changelings were placed in specially prepared holding cells lined with theta band radiation emitters that prevented shape-shifting. The Vorta and Jem'Hadar were examined for genetic tampering, hidden weapons, biological threats. Every test came back clean. Every interrogation suggested genuine defection. Every piece of intelligence they offered checked out against known Dominion patterns. It was either the most elaborate infiltration attempt in history, or it was exactly what Las claimed: Dominion soldiers who'd achieved the impossible and broken free. Tony watched it all from ops, his armor's sensors running parallel analysis to the station's systems. Something felt off, though he couldn't identify what. Maybe it was just paranoia born from too many years fighting enemies who specialized in deception. Or maybe it was justified caution in a universe he still didn't fully understand. As the last defector was secured, Cisco turned to his assembled senior staff. "All right, people, here's the situation. We now have 18 Dominion defectors in custody, a battlecruiser in our docking bay, and approximately 12 hours before the Dominion realizes what happened and sends a strike force through the wormhole to retrieve or eliminate them. Recommendations?" Contact Starfleet Command immediately, Kira said. This is above our pay grade. We need strategic guidance. Agreed, Cisco said. Dax, analyze the intelligence they're providing. If it's accurate, it could change our entire strategic posture regarding the Dominion threat. O'Brien, fortify the station's defenses. If the Dominion comes through that wormhole looking for a fight, we need to be ready to meet them with overwhelming force. Odo? The Changeling security chief's expression was troubled. Captain, I suggest extreme caution. As a Changeling myself, I understand my people's methods. The Founders don't accept failure. If these defectors are genuine, the Dominion will stop at nothing to prevent their example from spreading. They'll see this as an existential threat to their entire power structure. Mr. Stark? Tony looked at the tactical display showing DS9's position relative to the wormhole, calculating attack vectors and defensive options. You asked for recommendations, Captain. Here's mine. Prepare for war. Not because you want it, but because the Dominion won't give you a choice. They're coming, and when they do, it'll be with everything they can throw at this station. Your Federation principles just painted a target on DS9 that won't go away until this situation resolves, one way or another. Cisco was silent for a long moment, weighing the advice of his officers against his own judgment. Then we prepare, he said finally. But we also stand by our decision. The Federation offers asylum to those fleeing persecution. That principle doesn't change just because honoring it is dangerous. We'll fight if we must, but we won't abandon people who came to us for help. Tony felt something shift in his chest, respect for this captain who chose principles over expediency, who accepted the cost of his convictions without hesitation. Maybe the 24th century wasn't as naive as he'd thought. Maybe they were just brave enough to be what they claimed to be, even when it hurt. The universe was about to test that bravery in ways none of them could predict. And Tony Stark was going to make damn sure Deep Space Nine survived the test. The arrival of Dominion defectors aboard Deep Space Nine marked a turning point. Not just for Tony Stark, but for the entire Alpha Quadrant. In offering sanctuary, Captain Cisco had forced the Dominion's hand, exposing the fragile hypocrisy of an empire built on genetic loyalty. The Founders could not tolerate such defiance, and within hours, the wormhole erupted with warships. Yet, what followed was not the one-sided slaughter the Dominion anticipated. It became the first true demonstration of what happened when 21st century resilience met 24th century idealism. Tony's hybrid armor, fused with Federation phaser technology and reinforced by duranium alloys, proved decisive in the brutal battle that followed. He fought not as a soldier of Starfleet, but as a guardian who understood the cost of inaction. But this time, he fought alongside them, coordinating with Cisco's strategies, respecting Odo's security protocols, and trusting Dax's scientific insights. He learned that principles, when backed by unwavering courage, could be as formidable as any weapon. The Dominion was repelled, but the victory came with a price. The station was scarred, the political landscape permanently altered, and Tony's path home remained uncertain. Yet, in the aftermath, he found something unexpected. A place, not just a workshop or a temporary refuge, but a role. The Federation, for all its utopian aspirations, faced threats that sometimes required a shield they were unwilling to forge themselves. Tony Stark became that shield. The pragmatic guardian operating in the spaces Starfleet's regulations could not reach. He remained on Deep Space Nine, a permanent resident in a universe not his own. His armor, now a unique fusion of Stark technology and Federation science, hung in his workshop, a symbol of the bridge between two philosophies. Some days he worked with O'Brien to improve the station systems. Others, he studied the wormhole with Dax, inching closer to understanding the dimensional mechanics that might one day take him home. And when threats emerged, whether Romulan, Cardassian, or Dominion, he suited up, not as an invader, but as a protector. Tony Stark had not conquered the Star Trek universe. He had instead been conquered by it, not through force, but through the relentless, challenging optimism of people who believed a better future was worth fighting for, even when the fight itself was ugly. He learned that peace could be a choice you arm yourself to defend, not a passive state you hope to preserve. In the end, the man who built weapons to end wars found a society that had ended scarcity, and in that society, he found a new purpose: to be the sharp edge that protected the gentle core. The multiverse had thrown a thread where it didn't belong, and in the mending, both the thread and the tapestry were forever changed.